Abstract Expressionism, The Rise of Non-Representational Art, written by Haya Vint, narrated by Kara Miller. Chapter 1, Introduction to Abstract Expressionism. Abstract Expressionism, a revolutionary movement in modern art, emerged in the late 1940s and 1950s in New York City, marking a significant shift in the direction of art during the post-World War II era. It was a radical departure from traditional forms of art that focused on representational imagery and structured compositions. Abstract Expressionism broke away from conventional norms, embracing abstraction as a means to convey emotion, personal expression, and the exploration of the subconscious. This new form of art aimed to tap into deep, universal experiences and emotions, rather than depict reality in a literal or figurative manner. At its core, Abstract Expressionism sought to move beyond representation and instead explore non-objective art. The artists associated with this movement believed that art could not only represent the external world, but also reveal the inner workings of the mind. The spontaneous, sometimes chaotic, brushstrokes and the emphasis on materiality were meant to communicate the artist's emotional state, thoughts, and personal struggles. This artistic approach signaled a rejection of established conventions, offering a more visceral and direct connection to the viewer. The roots of abstract expressionism can be traced to earlier art movements like Surrealism and Dadaism, which emphasized the importance of chance, subconscious processes, and automatic drawing. Surrealists, such as Salvador Dali and André Masson, inspired abstract expressionists to embrace irrationality and spontaneity in their creative process. Additionally, the influence of German Expressionism, with its focus on emotion over form, and the psychological theories of Carl Jung, further contributed to the conceptual framework of the movement. One of the key aspects of abstract expressionism was the idea of the artist's active engagement with the canvas. Unlike traditional painting, which often involved carefully planned compositions, abstract expressionist works were dynamic and energetic. The act of painting became just as important as the final product, as seen in the works of Jackson Pollock, whose drip paintings embodied the very essence of action and energy. This method of painting as performance was a significant departure from the meticulous brushwork of earlier styles. While abstract expressionism began as a distinctly American movement, its impact was far-reaching, influencing artists globally. The movement's embrace of freedom, individuality, and emotional authenticity resonated with a wide range of artists, and its revolutionary approach to painting paved the way for future movements in modern art. Today, abstract expressionism continues to be recognized as one of the most influential and transformative periods in the history of art. The emergence of a new art movement. The emergence of abstract expressionism as a new art movement in the late 1940s and early 1950s marked a dramatic break from the traditions that had dominated Western art for centuries. In the wake of World War II, many artists sought to reflect the complex emotional and psychological landscape of a fractured world. Abstract expressionism arose as a response to the disillusionment and trauma that followed the war, offering a means for artists to express personal and collective anxiety, despair, and hope through non-representational forms. The movement found its roots in New York City, which had become the center of the global art world during this period, as Europe was recovering from the devastation of the war. While abstract expressionism did not emerge from any one singular event, its development was influenced by several key factors. A number of artists began to reject the conventions of figurative art and sought a more direct, emotional connection with their viewers. Their aim was not to recreate the visual world in a realistic way, but instead to convey the inner workings of the mind and the complexity of human experience. This desire for a new form of artistic expression was inspired in part by the philosophical climate of the time, which emphasized individualism and personal freedom. The movement was initially nurtured by a group of pioneering artists who were part of what came to be known as the New York School. Artists such as Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Mark Rothko, and Barnett Newman rejected the orderly, restrained nature of earlier artistic movements like realism and impressionism. They sought instead to create art that was spontaneous, free, and expressive, focusing on the physical act of painting as a form of personal liberation. One of the driving forces behind abstract expressionism was the desire to break free from the constraints of traditional artistic techniques and structures. Artists experimented with new materials, such as industrial paints, and developed innovative techniques like dripping, spraying, and pouring paint onto the canvas. These unconventional methods were not only a means of creating new visual effects, but also an embodiment of the artist's emotional engagement with the work. The gestural brushwork and bold use of color were integral to the movement's focus on immediacy and emotional intensity. As abstract expressionism gained momentum, it began to attract international attention, with artists from around the world looking to New York as a center for innovation. The movement's rise was not only a turning point in the history of art, but also a reflection of the changing cultural and political landscape of the time. It was in many ways a celebration of individual freedom, creativity, and the power of the human spirit to transcend the confines of conventional representation. Defining abstract expressionism. Abstract Expressionism, a revolutionary art movement that emerged in the United States during the 1940s and 1950s, is often defined by its focus on spontaneous, emotional expression and its rejection of traditional representational art. Rather than depicting the physical world or following strict rules of form and composition, abstract expressionism sought to capture the inner emotions, psychological states, and spiritual experiences of the artist. It was less concerned with depicting recognizable images or objects and more focused on conveying raw, unfiltered emotion through color, texture, and the physical act of painting itself. The movement is often associated with a few key characteristics: bold, gestural brushwork, an emphasis on abstraction, and an exploration of the unconscious mind. Artists who embraced abstract expressionism sought to create work that was authentic and deeply personal, with many focusing on the act of painting as a form of self-expression and liberation. This was a sharp departure from earlier art forms that prioritized realism and representation. The movement's rejection of traditional boundaries allowed artists to experiment with new techniques and materials, including dripping, pouring, and spraying paint, often resulting in highly textured, energetic works that were designed to evoke an emotional response from the viewer. At its core, abstract expressionism can be seen as a response to the anxieties and uncertainties of the post-war world. In the aftermath of World War II, artists were confronted with a sense of fragmentation, chaos, and disillusionment. Many turned to abstraction as a way to express the trauma and confusion of the era. The work was often large in scale, reinforcing the idea that the painting itself was an experience, one that invited the viewer to immerse themselves in the visual and emotional impact of the piece. The expansive canvases and dramatic use of color underscored the movement's emphasis on the freedom of expression and the individual artist's emotional journey. The term abstract expressionism was coined to describe the works of artists like Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, Willem de Kooning, and Barnett Newman. These artists, while diverse in style and approach, shared a commitment to abstraction and emotional depth. Pollock's iconic drip paintings, for example, captured the spontaneous, chaotic nature of human emotion, while Rothko's color fields sought to evoke a more contemplative and meditative response. Though their approaches varied, all abstract expressionists sought to push the boundaries of what art could be, rejecting realism in favor of a more visceral, emotional experience. The movement redefined the role of the artist and cemented New York City as the center of the global art world in the mid-20th century. Key artists and figures in the movement. Abstract Expressionism, while a diverse movement with various approaches, was shaped by a few key artists whose work came to define the movement. These figures were united by their shared desire to move away from representational art and explore new ways of conveying emotion, the unconscious mind, and human experience through abstraction. Among the most prominent artists of this movement were Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, Willem de Kooning, Barnett Newman, and Clifford Still, each contributing their unique style to the development of abstract expressionism. Jackson Pollock is perhaps the most iconic figure associated with abstract expressionism, known for his revolutionary technique of drip painting. Pollock's work is characterized by his chaotic, dynamic canvases that convey the intensity of emotional and physical energy. By dripping or pouring paint onto large canvases, Pollock transformed the act of painting into a performance, where the process of creating became just as important as the final image. His drip paintings, such as No. 5, 1948, encapsulate the freedom and spontaneous energy that defined abstract expressionism. Pollock's work emphasized the idea of the artist as an active, engaged participant in the creation process, and his work remains a symbol of the movement's dedication to raw, unfiltered expression. Mark Rothko, on the other hand, was known for his use of color as a means of evoking deep emotional responses. His signature style involved large fields of color, often arranged in rectangular blocks, designed to immerse the viewer in a contemplative, almost meditative experience. Rothko believed that color could communicate the most profound human emotions and sought to create an art that transcended the visual to reach the spiritual and emotional core of the viewer. Works like Nova 61, Rust and Blue exemplify his quest to use color to connect with the soul. Willem de Kooning brought an element of figurative abstraction to the movement. His works, such as Woman Eye, blend distorted, exaggerated human forms with aggressive brushstrokes and vibrant colors. De Kooning's style evolved throughout his career, moving from representational works to more abstract compositions, but his focus remained on capturing human emotion and the essence of the figure in dynamic, expressive ways. His work was often seen as a struggle between abstraction and figuration, embodying the internal tension that defined much of abstract expressionism. Barnett Newman's work focused on the relationship between space and color, using a minimalist approach to create bold, almost spiritual works. His most famous contribution was the zip, a vertical line that ran through his canvases, creating a sense of scale and cosmic significance. Works like Vir Heroicus Sublimis demonstrate Newman's focus on the sublime, with large fields of color interrupted by stark, contrasting lines that convey both tension and transcendence. Clifford Still, while less well-known than his contemporaries, made profound contributions to the movement with his large, jagged compositions that combine dramatic color contrasts and sharp forms. His works, such as 1957 J No. 2, are often seen as both primal and mystical, evoking deep emotional reactions through their abstract forms and expansive use of space. Still's work helped lay the groundwork for the movement's exploration of abstraction as a means of reaching deeper truths about the human experience. Together, these artists shaped abstract expressionism into one of the most influential movements in modern art, each contributing their distinct voice while exploring shared themes of freedom, emotion, and the power of abstraction. Historical context: post-war America. The emergence of abstract expressionism in the late 1940s and 1950s cannot be fully understood without considering the historical context of post-war America. After World War II, the United States found itself at the center of a rapidly changing global landscape. The war had left much of Europe devastated, both physically and culturally, while the U.S. emerged as a dominant political and economic power. This shift marked the beginning of a new era, characterized by rapid industrialization, technological advancements, and the rise of the United States as a global cultural leader. It was in this environment of transformation, tension, and optimism that abstract expressionism began to take shape. The war had a profound impact on American society, leaving many disillusioned by the horrors of conflict and the uncertainty of the future. The sense of fragmentation and dislocation created by the war was reflected in the art of the period, with many artists feeling the need to break away from traditional forms of expression. The psychological toll of the war, coupled with the rise of existentialist philosophy and the exploration of the unconscious mind, led artists to embrace abstraction as a way to convey complex, often contradictory emotions. They sought to move beyond the constraints of realism and create art that was more immediate, personal, and direct. The post-war era also saw the rise of the Cold War, which further shaped the cultural landscape of the time. In the context of global political tensions, abstract expressionism was sometimes seen as a reflection of American freedom and individuality. As Europe grappled with the aftermath of war and Soviet influence loomed over the East, American artists embraced their newfound freedom to create without restriction. This sense of freedom, both artistic and political, resonated deeply in a nation that was increasingly defining itself as a beacon of democratic values in opposition to totalitarian regimes. New York City emerged as the epicenter of the abstract expressionist movement during this period, attracting artists from around the world. The city's vibrant cultural scene, fueled by an influx of immigrants and a booming post-war economy, provided the perfect environment for the growth of this radical new art form. In this climate, abstract expressionism was not just an artistic movement, but also a cultural statement, reflecting the complex emotional landscape of post-war America and the desire to break free from the past to create something entirely new. Influence of Surrealism and other art movements. The development of abstract expressionism was deeply influenced by a variety of earlier art movements, particularly Surrealism, along with elements of Dadaism and German Expressionism. Each of these movements contributed key ideas and techniques that abstract expressionists would adopt, adapt, and transform as they sought to create a new artistic language that reflected the inner workings of the human mind and emotional experience. Surrealism, which emerged in the 1920s, had a profound impact on abstract expressionism, particularly in its emphasis on the unconscious mind and the importance of spontaneous creation. Surrealist artists like Salvador Dali and André Breton championed the exploration of dreams, irrationality, and the subconscious as a means of uncovering hidden truths about the human experience. Techniques such as automatic drawing and free association encouraged artists to bypass logical thought and embrace intuition. Abstract expressionists, particularly Jackson Pollock, were influenced by these ideas and sought to tap into the unconscious through their creative processes. Pollock's drip paintings, for example, can be seen as a form of automatic painting, where the act of creating became a means of accessing deeper emotional states and psychological truths. Dadaism, an earlier movement that arose in the aftermath of World War I, also left its mark on abstract expressionism. Dada artists rejected traditional artistic conventions and embraced chaos, spontaneity, and absurdity as a response to the horrors of war and the failures of civilization. This rejection of order and structure resonated with the abstract expressionists, who similarly sought to break away from the formal rules of classical art. The Dadaist emphasis on chance, randomness, and the materiality of the medium can be seen in Pollock's dripped paint, as well as in the bold, non-traditional techniques used by other abstract expressionists. German Expressionism, with its emphasis on emotional intensity and distorted forms, was another key influence. Artists like Ernst Ludwig Kirchner and Wassily Kandinsky, who explored abstraction in their own ways, inspired the abstract expressionists' focus on raw emotion and personal expression. The expressionists' bold use of color, fragmented shapes, and distorted figures resonated with artists such as Willem de Kooning, who integrated these ideas into his dynamic, often unsettling depictions of the human figure. In addition to these movements, abstract expressionism was also shaped by American regionalism, modernism, and the innovative approaches to painting and sculpture developed in the early 20th century. These combined influences allowed abstract expressionism to emerge as a truly revolutionary movement, combining ideas of freedom, individuality, and emotional depth in ways that had never been attempted before in the art world. Chapter 2: The Philosophical Foundations. The philosophical foundations of abstract expressionism were deeply rooted in the existential and psychological currents of the early to mid 20th century. The movement emerged at a time when traditional ideas about art, reality, and the role of the artist were being challenged and redefined. Central to abstract expressionism was the desire to create art that transcended mere representation and delved into the realm of the unconscious, the emotional, and the existential. The work of artists such as Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and Mark Rothko reflected a deep engagement with philosophical ideas that questioned the nature of human existence, perception, and personal freedom. Existentialism, which was gaining prominence in Europe and the United States during the 1940s and 1950s, provided a significant philosophical backdrop for abstract expressionism. The existentialist thinkers of the time, such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, focused on themes of individual freedom, the search for meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe, and the tension between chaos and order. These ideas resonated with artists who were grappling with the emotional aftermath of World War II and the sense of disillusionment that pervaded the era. For many abstract expressionists, the act of creating was a way of asserting personal freedom and confronting the existential challenges of living in a fragmented world. They rejected the constraints of traditional artistic forms, embracing instead a spontaneous, intuitive process that allowed them to express their individual experience of existence. At the same time, the psychological theories of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung had a profound influence on the movement. Freud's exploration of the unconscious and the importance of repressed desires in shaping human behavior encouraged artists to look beyond conscious thought and tap into deeper, often hidden, aspects of the self. Carl Jung's theories of archetypes and the collective unconscious also played a key role, inspiring artists to explore universal symbols and themes that transcended individual experience. The abstract expressionists saw their work not only as a personal expression, but as a means of accessing a deeper, more universal truth. Furthermore, the concept of the sublime became central to many abstract expressionists' work. The sublime, as defined by philosophers such as Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant, refers to experiences that transcend ordinary perception and evoke awe, wonder, even terror. Abstract expressionists, particularly in the use of vast expanses of color and intense brushwork, sought to create a sense of the sublime that would overwhelm the viewer's senses and provoke an emotional, almost spiritual reaction. In sum, the philosophical foundations of abstract expressionism were complex and multifaceted, drawing from existentialism, psychology, and metaphysical ideas about the nature of human experience. These influences helped shape the movement's focus on spontaneity, emotional intensity, and the search for meaning in a world that seemed increasingly fragmented and uncertain. The search for freedom in art. At the heart of abstract expressionism was a profound search for freedom, both in terms of artistic expression and personal liberation. For the artists involved in the movement, freedom was not just a stylistic choice, but a deeply ingrained philosophical and emotional pursuit. Emerging in the aftermath of World War II, abstract expressionism represented a rejection of the constraints imposed by traditional artistic forms, as well as a response to the political and social upheaval of the time. This freedom was not simply about abandoning previous artistic conventions. It was also about embracing the act of creation itself as a form of personal liberation and self-expression. One of the key aspects of this search for freedom was the movement's emphasis on spontaneity and the subconscious. Artists like Jackson Pollock, who pioneered the technique of drip painting, sought to free themselves from the formal constraints of composition, allowing the paint to flow and form on the canvas in an organic and unplanned manner. For Pollock, this was a way of tapping into his unconscious mind, where emotions and impulses could be freely expressed without the filtering of rational thought. The idea of letting go of control and allowing the creative process to unfold naturally was seen as a way to access a deeper, more authentic form of expression. This desire for freedom was also a response to the rigid, often highly structured forms of art that dominated the Western tradition. Abstract expressionists rejected the representational art of the past, which they saw as limiting and bound by conventional rules. Instead, they embraced abstraction as a means to break free from the literal and dive into the emotional and psychological depths of the human experience. The movement's emphasis on bold color, dramatic brushstrokes, and large-scale canvases was designed to engage the viewer in an immersive, visceral experience, one that could not be reduced to simple interpretation or representation. The political and cultural climate of post-war America also played a significant role in the abstract expressionists' search for freedom. In the context of the Cold War, the movement's emphasis on individuality and personal expression resonated with American ideals of democracy and personal liberty. Abstract expressionism, as an art form that celebrated autonomy and emotional freedom, became an emblem of the values that the United States sought to promote during a time of global tension and ideological division. For the artists involved, their work was not just a personal quest, but a reflection of the broader cultural struggle for freedom and self-determination in a world shaped by conflict and uncertainty. Ultimately, the search for freedom in abstract expressionism was about more than just breaking with tradition. It was about forging a new path that allowed artists to explore and express the complexities of the human condition in an unrestrained and deeply personal way. It was a pursuit of liberation, both artistic and emotional, that resonated on a global scale, reflecting the need for renewal and individuality in a world marked by instability. The role of the subconscious mind. The role of the subconscious mind played a central and transformative role in the development of abstract expressionism. Artists associated with the movement, such as Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and Mark Rothko, sought to explore the depths of human consciousness, turning inward to access emotions, desires, and psychological states that could not be fully expressed through traditional representational art. The subconscious was seen not merely as a psychological concept, but as an essential space where raw, unfiltered human experience could be captured and conveyed through abstract forms. One of the most significant ways the subconscious influenced abstract expressionism was through the emphasis on spontaneity and the process of automatic creation. Surrealism, with its focus on tapping into the unconscious mind through techniques like automatic drawing, had a significant impact on abstract expressionist artists. This approach emphasized allowing the mind to flow freely, without intervention from the rational or conscious mind. Artists aimed to bypass logic and control, creating works that emerged naturally, in an organic fashion. The result was a form of art that was untethered to the limitations of reason, enabling the artist to connect directly with their inner world. Jackson Pollock, in particular, embraced the subconscious in his famous drip paintings. His process was one of complete immersion in the act of painting, where he allowed his movements and gestures to be guided by unconscious impulses rather than premeditated plans. Pollock famously stated that he was not afraid of making mistakes, which reflects the freedom he found in surrendering control and letting his subconscious shape the artwork. The chaotic yet intricate layers of paint in his works, such as Autumn Rhythm and Number 5, 1948, reflect a complex inner landscape, one that was not easily translatable into words, but was instead conveyed through abstract marks and gestures. The emphasis on the subconscious mind also allowed artists to address emotions and psychological states that were often difficult to articulate. For many abstract expressionists, Their work became a way of confronting trauma, anxiety, and existential questions. Mark Rothko, for example, used color as a tool to convey deep emotional states and explore the tension between human vulnerability and transcendence. His large, field-like canvases, filled with rich, evocative colors, invite the viewer to experience a direct emotional response, one that bypasses intellectual understanding and engages with the subconscious. In this way, the role of the subconscious in abstract expressionism was not only a reflection of the artist's personal explorations, but also a broader cultural movement toward understanding the deeper, often hidden parts of the human psyche. By channeling the subconscious, abstract expressionist artists sought to create work that was more authentic, more intimate, and ultimately more connected to the complexities of human existence. The subconscious for them was not a mysterious or frightening space, but one rich with creative potential and emotional truth. The influence of existentialism and phenomenology. The philosophical movements of existentialism and phenomenology had a profound impact on abstract expressionism, deeply shaping the way artists approached the act of creation and the role of the viewer in experiencing art. Both of these schools of thought were concerned with individual experience, freedom, and the search for meaning in a world that often appeared fragmented or absurd. Emerging in the early to mid-20th century, existentialism, with its focus on human freedom, anxiety, and authenticity, resonated strongly with artists like Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and Mark Rothko, who sought to express emotional truths and confront the uncertainties of existence. Existentialism, as articulated by philosophers such as Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and Martin Heidegger, was centered on the idea that human beings are free and responsible for creating their own meaning in a world that lacks inherent purpose. Sartre's notion of being for itself emphasized the importance of subjective experience and the individual's ability to define their own existence. For abstract expressionist artists, this concept of personal freedom became central to their work. They sought to create art that was deeply personal and authentic, free from the constraints of formalism or tradition. The spontaneous, often chaotic techniques employed by Jackson Pollock, for example, can be understood as a direct manifestation of existential freedom. Pollock's drip paintings, in which the process of creation was just as significant as the finished piece, exemplified an act of raw, unfiltered self-expression, a physical engagement with the canvas that mirrored the artist's own experience of existence. The focus on individual subjectivity also aligned with the ideas of phenomenology, a philosophical approach that was concerned with how humans experience and perceive the world. Edmund Husserl and Maurice Merleau-Ponty, key figures in phenomenology, emphasized the importance of lived experience and the way in which objects and phenomena are perceived by the individual subject. For abstract expressionists, phenomenology's focus on perception and emotional engagement with the world influenced their desire to engage the viewer in an immediate, visceral way. The large-scale works of artists like Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman, with their bold, expansive use of color and space, were designed to envelop the viewer in a sensory experience that bypassed intellectual analysis and reached directly to the viewer's emotional and perceptual experience. Ultimately, the influence of existentialism and phenomenology in abstract expressionism can be seen in the movement's focus on personal freedom, the rejection of traditional norms, and the quest for a deeper emotional and perceptual connection to the world. Both philosophical frameworks emphasize the significance of human experience, subjectivity, and the search for meaning, themes that were central to the work of abstract expressionist artists as they explored new ways to engage with the complexities of existence and the self. The concept of the sublime in abstract art. The concept of the sublime played a significant role in the development and impact of abstract expressionism, influencing both the way artists approached their work and the way it was experienced by viewers. Rooted in the philosophical writings of Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant, the sublime refers to an aesthetic experience that evokes feelings of awe, wonder, and even fear in the face of something vast, powerful, or overwhelming. The sublime is not merely about beauty, but about confronting the vastness of existence, the limits of human understanding, and the intense emotional responses that such encounters elicit. Abstract expressionist artists, with their emphasis on scale, raw emotion, and the transcendence of traditional representation, sought to invoke the sublime in their work, creating art that was both visually striking and deeply stirring on an emotional and philosophical level. In abstract expressionism, the sublime manifested through large, immersive canvases, dramatic color fields, and dynamic brushstrokes. Artists like Mark Rothko, Barnett Newman, and Clifford Still used scale and color as tools to evoke a sense of the infinite, attempting to provoke an emotional response that went beyond intellectual analysis. Rothko's color fields, often monumental in size, envelop the viewer in deep, resonant hues, encouraging them to contemplate vast, unspoken emotional states. His works, such as Orange and Yellow or Nober 61, Rust and Blue, invite viewers into an almost meditative state, offering an experience that is less about the visual object itself and more about the emotional and psychological reaction it elicits. Rothko's focus on color as a means to evoke the sublime speaks to a desire to transcend the limitations of the material world and tap into something deeper, something spiritual. Similarly, Barnett Newman's work, with its iconic zips, vertical lines that slice through large expanses of color, was an attempt to evoke a sense of the infinite and the divine. In works like Vir Heroicus Sublimis, the stark contrast between the expansive color fields and the central zip creates a sense of tension and awe, suggesting a larger, unknowable force. Newman's exploration of the sublime sought to provide a direct, unmediated experience of something beyond the ordinary, something that resonated with the viewer on a deeply emotional and existential level. Pollock's drip paintings also resonate with the sublime, albeit in a more chaotic and energetic manner. The sheer physicality and intensity of his paintings evoke a sense of the uncontrollable, of nature's raw power and unpredictability. The wild swirls of paint on canvas can be seen as an attempt to capture the vastness of human emotion and existence, something that cannot be easily contained or understood, but must be experienced. In all of these works, the sublime in abstract expressionism is not merely about creating beauty, but about offering an experience that confronts the viewer with something beyond their understanding, an overwhelming force that engages both the emotional and the intellectual. Through abstraction, these artists sought to transcend the limitations of traditional art forms and tap into universal, existential themes that speak to the deeper human experience. The sublime in this context is both a reaction to the intensity of the human condition and an attempt to provide a glimpse into something beyond the finite, into the infinite, the divine, or the mysterious forces that govern life itself. Chapter 3: Key Artists and Their Contributions. The abstract expressionist movement was defined not only by its innovative techniques and philosophies, but also by the groundbreaking work of its key artists. These artists, each with their own distinctive approach, helped shape the movement and expand its boundaries, challenging conventional ideas of what art could be. Among the most prominent figures were Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Mark Rothko, and Barnett Newman, each of whom made significant contributions that continue to influence contemporary art. Jackson Pollock is perhaps the most well-known abstract expressionist, renowned for his revolutionary drip paintings. Pollock's work radically redefined the process of painting, shifting the focus from composition to the act of creation itself. His technique of dripping or pouring paint onto a canvas laid out on the floor, known as drip painting, was a direct confrontation with the conventions of traditional easel painting. Pollock's works, such as No. 5, 1948, and Autumn Rhythm, were characterized by their dynamic energy, chaotic forms, and intricate webs of overlapping paint. For Pollock, the act of painting was a deeply personal, almost ritualistic process that allowed him to access the subconscious mind. His contributions to abstract expressionism made a dramatic statement about the emotional and psychological potential of painting as a medium. Willem de Kooning, another pivotal figure, made major contributions to the movement through his distinctive approach to the human figure and abstraction. De Kooning's work, particularly in his Woman series, blended figuration with abstraction, creating dynamic and sometimes grotesque representations of the human form. His vigorous brushwork, expressive use of color, and aggressive manipulation of the figure reflected the emotional intensity that was central to abstract expressionism. De Kooning's ability to merge abstraction with representation broke boundaries and opened new possibilities for the movement, demonstrating that abstraction could encompass a wide range of emotional and psychological expressions. Mark Rothko, known for his serene yet emotionally charged color field paintings, made a different kind of contribution. Unlike Pollock's chaotic energy or de Kooning's energetic figures, Rothko's works, such as Number 61, Rust and Blue, and Orange and Yellow, were meditative and contemplative, characterized by large expanses of color that created a sense of depth and space. Rothko's aim was to evoke deep emotional responses in the viewer, tapping into universal feelings of awe, spirituality, and melancholy. His color fields were intended to elicit a transcendent experience, moving away from formal composition in favor of a direct emotional connection with the viewer. Barnett Newman, known for his iconic zips, vertical lines that divided large color fields, also played a key role in abstract expressionism. His minimalist yet bold compositions, such as Verheroica's Sublimis, sought to evoke the sublime and the infinite. Through his exploration of color and space, Newman aimed to create an experience of transcendence, emphasizing simplicity and purity of form to confront existential themes of life, death, and the human condition. Together, these artists exemplified the diverse approaches within abstract expressionism, from Pollock's spontaneous energy to Rothko's spiritual depth and de Kooning's fusion of abstraction with figuration. Each artist's unique contribution helped define the movement and ensure its lasting influence on the art world. Their work collectively represented a shift away from traditional notions of art, opening up new possibilities for expressing the complexities of the human experience. Jackson Pollock, the pioneer of action painting. Jackson Pollock is widely regarded as one of the most influential and innovative artists of the abstract expressionist movement. Known as the pioneer of action painting, Pollock's approach to creating art transformed the very nature of painting, making the act of creation itself as important as the final piece. His dramatic, energetic, and spontaneous style not only redefined the medium of painting, but also redefined the relationship between the artist, the artwork, and the viewer. Pollock's iconic drip paintings, which employed a radical departure from traditional painting techniques, revolutionized the art world and helped to establish him as a central figure in 20th century modern art. Pollock's distinctive approach, often referred to as drip painting, emerged in the late 1940s as he sought a way to break free from the constraints of traditional representational art. Working on large canvases placed on the floor, Pollock would pour, splash, and drip liquid paint onto the surface in a frenetic, almost primal manner. By using brushes, sticks, or even his hands, Pollock embraced a process of spontaneous physical action, allowing the paint to flow freely and unpredictably. This method of painting embodied a direct connection between the artist's emotions, movements, and the final piece. His physical engagement with the canvas, often involving full-body movement, turned the act of painting into a dynamic performance where the artist's inner world was expressed through rapid, unrestrained gestures. Pollock's most famous works, such as Number 5, 1948, and Autumn Rhythm, Number 30, exemplify his groundbreaking approach. These paintings, filled with dense layers of dripped and poured paint, create an intricate, chaotic web of lines and shapes that seem to pulse with energy. The resulting compositions are not just abstract forms, they are emotional landscapes that invite viewers to connect with the artist's state of mind. Pollock's work also introduced an element of chance, as the uncontrollable nature of his techniques led to an inherent unpredictability in the final outcome. The paint's interaction with the canvas, the speed of Pollock's movements, and the randomness of the process created an artwork that was always in flux, never entirely predictable. Pollock's use of the canvas as a physical space for action also had profound philosophical implications. His work represented a rejection of traditional artistic conventions, such as composition and perspective, which had long governed Western art. In abandoning these constraints, Pollock not only liberated his art from the confines of representation, but also made the act of creation itself a powerful statement about freedom, spontaneity, and the exploration of the unconscious. His influence on the abstract expressionist movement cannot be overstated. Through his radical techniques and conceptual breakthroughs, Pollock became a key figure in redefining what art could be and how it could be experienced. Mark Rothko, Color Field and Emotional Expression. Mark Rothko, one of the most important figures in abstract expressionism, is best known for his distinctive color field paintings, which focused on the emotional and spiritual resonance of color. While many of his contemporaries, such as Jackson Pollock, were celebrated for their dynamic and energetic works, Rothko's art was characterized by its simplicity, quietude, and meditative quality. Through his use of color, Rothko sought to create an immersive experience for the viewer, one that transcended intellectual understanding and engaged deeply with the viewer's emotions. Rothko's signature style emerged in the late 1940s and early 1950s, during which he began to move away from figuration and toward a form of abstraction that prioritized the emotional power of color. His compositions typically feature large, soft-edged rectangles of color that float on or within the canvas, often in contrasting hues. These color blocks are carefully layered and applied, creating a sense of depth and luminosity that invites the viewer to become enveloped by the painting. Unlike the aggressive energy found in the works of Pollock or Willem de Kooning, Rothko's color fields evoke a quieter, more introspective kind of emotional intensity. In paintings such as Number 61, Rust and Blue, and Orange and Yellow, Rothko used color to express universal human experiences, such as joy, sorrow, and the search for transcendence. The colors themselves were not simply aesthetic choices. They were means of conveying complex emotional states. Rothko's works often explore the tension between light and dark, evoking feelings of both calm and turbulence. The color fields are designed to be immersive, inviting the viewer to experience the painting as an emotional journey. Rothko once described his work as not about the visual, but rather as a means of achieving an emotional experience. His paintings were meant to speak directly to the viewer's subconscious, bypassing intellectual interpretation in favor of a deeper emotional connection. One of Rothko's most iconic contributions was his exploration of the spiritual and the sublime through color. He sought to create an atmosphere where the viewer could experience a sense of awe and wonder, similar to the experience of encountering a vast, infinite space. Rothko believed that art could serve as a vehicle for spiritual exploration, and his color fields were designed to engage viewers on a deeply personal and transcendent level. In works such as Four Darks in Red and Untitled Black on Maroon, Rothko sought to create a space where emotion, meditation, and spirituality could coexist, drawing viewers into a reflective, almost contemplative state. Through his color field paintings, Rothko revolutionized the way that color was perceived in art, shifting it from a purely decorative element to a profound tool for emotional and spiritual expression. His legacy remains one of emotional depth, subtlety, and the pursuit of a universal human experience through abstraction. Willem de Kooning, Feminine Figures and Abstract Portraiture. Willem de Kooning, a key figure in the abstract expressionist movement, made significant contributions to the development of modern art through his groundbreaking approach to abstraction, particularly in his depiction of the female form. His exploration of feminine figures, characterized by a striking balance between abstraction and figuration, redefined the boundaries of portraiture and profoundly influenced the course of 20th century art. De Kooning's ability to blend raw emotion with complex, dynamic forms set his work apart, making him one of the most innovative and controversial artists of his time. De Kooning's most famous series, Woman, painted in the late 1940s and early 1950s, is a radical reimagining of the female figure. In these works, he fused abstraction with distorted representations of the human body, creating portraits that were at once violent, sensual, and emotional. The women in these paintings are often portrayed in a fragmented, distorted manner, with exaggerated facial features, aggressive brushstrokes, and a sense of chaos that challenges traditional depictions of the female form. While some critics have interpreted these works as misogynistic, de Kooning himself emphasized that they were an exploration of the complexity and power of the female figure, not a reduction of it. His use of bold, sweeping lines and intense color, applied in layers, often with a sense of urgency and force, reflects both the artist's physical engagement with the canvas and the emotional intensity of his subject matter. The Woman series marked a turning point in de Kooning's career as he moved beyond the more restrained abstraction of his earlier works toward a more expressive, gestural approach. His dynamic brushstrokes and fractured forms were emblematic of the abstract expressionist emphasis on spontaneity and emotion. De Kooning's figures, despite being abstracted, are not purely formal exercises. They embody a visceral, emotional response to the human body and experience. The chaotic, almost violent treatment of the figure in these works suggests a struggle between order and disorder, a theme that runs throughout much of de Kooning's oeuvre. While the Woman series is perhaps de Kooning's most iconic work, his contributions to abstract expressionism were not limited to this theme alone. Throughout his career, he explored a range of subjects, from landscapes to still lifes, using abstraction as a tool for emotional expression rather than representation. His portraiture, whether of women or other figures, remained a vehicle for exploring complex psychological and emotional states, blurring the line between abstraction and figuration. Willem de Kooning's legacy lies in his ability to push the boundaries of abstraction, creating work that was both profoundly personal and universally resonant. His exploration of the female form through abstraction continues to influence and inspire contemporary artists, while his emotional intensity and innovative use of the human figure solidified his place as a central figure in abstract expressionism. Barnett Newman, Zips and the Search for Meaning. Barnett Newman was one of the most significant figures in abstract expressionism, known for his minimalist style and his pioneering use of zips, vertical lines that cut through large expanses of color in his work. His art was rooted in a quest for profound meaning, exploring the existential and spiritual aspects of the human condition. Newman's distinctive approach to abstraction was less about creating visual forms for their own sake and more about expressing a deep, universal need for transcendence and self-reflection. Through his use of color, space, and the iconic zip, Newman created paintings that encouraged viewers to engage with the sublime and explore the very essence of existence. Newman's best-known works, such as Vir Heroicus Sublimis and On Ment, feature large color fields that are interrupted by single vertical lines, the zips. These zips, which are typically centered within the canvas or placed asymmetrically, evoke a sense of tension between the vastness of the surrounding color fields and the sharp, commanding presence of the line. The zip is more than just a compositional tool. It is symbolic of human experience, an interruption, a division, and a point of connection. The line can be seen as a metaphor for the human figure, the self, or the passage of time, and it serves as a visual cue for the viewer to explore the depths of emotional and spiritual states. Newman often spoke about the zip as a form of communication that transcends the material, suggesting that it was a symbol for the ineffable and the infinite. For Newman, Color was a means of creating an immersive, almost metaphysical experience. His vast, luminous color fields are not simply aesthetic choices, but emotional and psychological landscapes. The colors he used were intended to evoke specific moods, emotions, and even spiritual sensations. In works like Blackfire Wine and The Stations of the Cross, the use of color combined with the zips creates a sense of expansiveness and introspection, engaging the viewer not only visually, but emotionally and existentially. Newman sought to create works that did not represent the world, but resonated with the viewer on a deeply personal level, encouraging an encounter with the sublime. Newman's exploration of the human condition was deeply influenced by his interest in philosophy and religion. His work often dealt with the tension between life and death, the search for meaning, and the existential challenge of existence. His canvases, often devoid of any recognizable subject matter, offered a space where viewers could confront these themes without the distractions of representation. The zip, in its simplicity, became a focal point for understanding the larger, more profound questions of human experience. Barnett Newman's contributions to abstract expressionism were marked by his quest for something beyond the physical realm, a search for meaning, spirituality, and transcendence. His work remains a powerful testament to the ability of abstract art to engage with complex existential themes and to communicate profound emotional and intellectual ideas. Through the use of color, space, and the zip, Newman created a body of work that continues to challenge and inspire viewers to confront the mysteries of existence and the human spirit. Clyfford Still, creating a new visual language. Clyfford Still was one of the pioneering figures in abstract expressionism, whose work laid the groundwork for the development of a new visual language in the world of modern art. Known for his large, emotive canvases and dramatic use of color and form, Still was determined to create a unique visual language that moved away from traditional representation and sought to express deep, often existential themes. His distinctive style, characterized by bold, jagged shapes and vibrant colors, set him apart from his contemporaries, and his work became central to the evolution of abstract expressionism in the 1950s. Still's approach to painting was rooted in a desire to transcend the material world and connect with something deeper, spiritual, emotional, or even primal. His canvases are often vast, monumental works, which seem to invite the viewer into a raw and unfiltered experience of the artist's emotional state. His paintings are not about depicting the physical world. Instead, they use abstraction to explore concepts of existence, time, and human experience. In works such as PH 385 and 1944 and No. 2, Still employed jagged, almost violent shapes that evoke a sense of upheaval or tension, while the vibrant, contrasting colors suggest a confrontation with both inner and outer forces. These abstract forms are not merely ornamental. They are the embodiment of his emotional and philosophical concerns, expressed through a new visual language that was non-representational but full of meaning. Still's decision to move away from recognizable forms in favor of abstract shapes was a conscious choice to break free from the constraints of representational art. He believed that traditional forms of art were too limiting for the expression of complex, internal experiences. His unique technique of applying paint in thick layers, sometimes directly onto the canvas with a palette knife, created a textured, almost sculptural quality to his work. This physicality and rawness of his painting process mirrored the intensity of his emotional engagement with his subject matter. His use of color, bold, saturated hues applied in large, sweeping areas, further reinforced his intention to create a visceral, sensory experience for the viewer. What made Still's work truly innovative was his ability to communicate powerful, existential themes through purely abstract forms. His paintings evoke feelings of solitude, conflict, and transcendence, offering a visual language that is deeply personal yet universally resonant. While Still was often seen as an outsider within the abstract expressionist movement, due to his refusal to adhere to the collective ethos of the New York school, His work's profound emotional depth and pioneering techniques earned him a vital place in the history of modern art. Through his groundbreaking use of abstraction, Clifford Still developed a new visual language that spoke directly to the human experience, engaging the viewer with both its physicality and its emotional intensity. His legacy endures as one of the most influential artists in abstract expressionism, challenging conventional boundaries and reshaping the way art could express complex emotional and philosophical ideas. Chapter 4: Techniques and Styles in Abstract Expressionism. Abstract Expressionism is defined not only by its emotional depth and philosophical underpinnings, but also by the innovative techniques and diverse styles employed by its practitioners. While the movement as a whole rejects traditional artistic conventions, its artists explored a wide range of experimental approaches to painting, resulting in a variety of stylistic developments, from the spontaneous energy of action painting to the meditative qualities of color field works. Abstract Expressionism is marked by a commitment to individuality and self-expression. The techniques used by these artists were as varied and dynamic as their personal philosophies, contributing to the movement's lasting impact on the art world. One of the defining techniques of abstract expressionism is action painting, a term closely associated with Jackson Pollock. This approach emphasizes the physical act of painting as a central element of the artwork. Pollock, in particular, is known for his drip painting technique, in which he allowed the paint to flow freely onto the canvas, creating intricate webs of color. The act of painting itself, often performed with quick, vigorous movements, became a way to express unconscious impulses and raw emotion. Pollock's use of large-scale canvases, which he worked on the floor, encouraged an immersive experience, where the artist's gestures could be fully realized. This technique was revolutionary in its shift away from traditional brushwork and composition, focusing instead on process and spontaneity. In contrast to the chaotic energy of action painting, the color field technique, championed by artists like Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman, focused on large, flat areas of color to evoke emotional responses. These works often feature large, luminous swaths of color that are intended to overwhelm the viewer with their emotional and spiritual presence. Rothko's use of soft-edged rectangles of color invites contemplation, offering an almost meditative experience, while Newman's bold zips divided expanses of color and created a sense of tension and transcendence. These artists were not concerned with the illusion of depth or perspective. Instead, their works sought to create an emotional resonance through color and form. Another important technique in abstract expressionism was the use of texture. Artists such as Clifford Still and Willem de Kooning employed thick, impasto applications of paint, often using palette knives, brushes, or even their hands to build up layers of paint that created a tactile surface. This textural approach added a physical dimension to the artwork, emphasizing the artist's direct interaction with the medium. De Kooning, in particular, combined aggressive brushstrokes with smears and scraped areas, creating a sense of dynamic tension between the painted surface and the viewer's perception of space. These techniques, ranging from Pollock's dynamic dripping to Rothko's contemplative fields of color, reflect the abstract expressionists' shared commitment to emotional authenticity and artistic freedom. While the movement embraced a wide variety of methods, all sought to break free from representational art and create works that engage the viewer on a visceral, emotional level. Through experimentation with texture, color, and process, abstract expressionism forever changed the landscape of modern art, offering new ways to convey the depth of the human experience. Action painting, spontaneity, and movement. Action painting, one of the most prominent techniques associated with abstract expressionism, revolutionized the way art was created and perceived in the 20th century. This approach, most notably exemplified by Jackson Pollock, emphasized the physical act of painting as an integral part of the artwork itself. Unlike traditional painting, where the artist typically worked with a focus on composition and detail, action painting celebrated spontaneity, movement, and the raw energy of the artist's gestures. The technique was not just about the final product, but about the process of creation. The artist's emotional and physical engagement with the canvas became as important as the visual result. At the core of action painting is the idea that the act of painting should be an expressive, visceral experience. Pollock's drip paintings are the quintessential example of this. Instead of carefully applying paint with a brush, Pollock would pour, drip, and splatter liquid paint onto a large canvas spread out on the floor, using his entire body to guide the paint's movement. The result was a chaotic, web-like network of lines and color that appeared spontaneous, yet was deeply informed by Pollock's emotional state. His process was direct, unplanned, and unrestricted, creating a dynamic interplay between the artist's internal world and the physical act of creation. The viewer could see the traces of his movements, with each drip or stroke reflecting Pollock's mental and emotional condition at the time. This emphasis on process over product was a radical departure from previous artistic traditions. In traditional Western art, the artist's hand was often hidden behind the final composition, and the focus was on achieving balance, harmony, and precision. In contrast, action painting prioritized the moment of creation itself, allowing the viewer to engage with the physicality of the painting process. The canvas became an arena for the artist's struggle with the materials and with the emotions they sought to convey, turning the act of painting into a performance of sorts. Action painting also embraced the idea of chance. Pollock and other artists in the movement allowed the paint to behave unpredictably, introducing an element of randomness and freedom. The splatters and drips were not meticulously planned, but were instead left open to the possibilities of how the paint would move across the canvas. This randomness emphasized the fluidity of the creative process and the sense of immediacy and unpredictability that defines action painting. Through its emphasis on spontaneity, movement, and emotional engagement, action painting helped redefine the role of the artist and the act of painting itself. It broke down the barriers between the artist's inner life and the artwork, creating a direct, unfiltered channel for emotional expression. Pollock's work, along with that of other action painters, remains a cornerstone of abstract expressionism, symbolizing the liberation of art from traditional conventions and celebrating the expressive power of the creative act. Color field painting, the power of color. Color field painting is one of the most significant movements within abstract expressionism, focusing primarily on the emotional and psychological power of color. Unlike action painting, which emphasized energetic brushwork and the artist's physical engagement with the canvas, color field painting sought to create a direct, immersive emotional experience through the use of large swaths of color. This approach was pioneered by artists such as Mark Rothko, Barnett Newman, and Clifford Still, who believed that color itself could evoke a deep, contemplative response in the viewer, bypassing the need for recognizable subject matter or intricate composition. At the heart of color field painting is the idea that color, when used expansively and with intention, can evoke profound emotional states. Mark Rothko, one of the movement's most prominent figures, used soft-edged rectangular fields of color to create a sense of space and light. His works often feature large, luminous blocks of color that seem to float on the canvas, inviting the viewer into a meditative, introspective state. Rothko believed that color had the power to communicate emotions directly to the subconscious, without the need for any representational imagery. In paintings like No. 61, Rust and Blue, Rothko employed contrasting colors to convey a sense of calm, sorrow, or transcendence, guiding the viewer through a quiet emotional journey. Barnett Newman, another key artist in the movement, took a similar approach to color but infused his works with a sense of structure and tension. His use of the zip, a vertical line that divides large expanses of color, created a sense of balance and division within the composition. In works like Vir Heroicus Sublimis, Newman used vibrant, expansive fields of color to evoke a sense of the sublime, and the zip acted as a formal element that focused the viewer's attention, giving the composition a sense of rhythm and movement. Newman saw his work as a way to engage with the viewer on a spiritual level, using color not only as an aesthetic choice, but as a vehicle for exploring profound themes of existence and the human condition. Clifford Still, one of the movement's pioneers, used color in a similarly emotional manner, but often with more raw and jagged applications. His canvases are filled with bursts of intense, contrasting colors that convey a sense of tumult and intensity. For Still, color was a means of channeling his inner turmoil and struggles, creating works that were both expressive and dramatic. Color field painting, in its purest form, embraced the notion that color itself could be a language, one that transcended traditional representation. It was not just about creating aesthetically pleasing forms, but about creating a visceral experience that engaged the viewer's emotions directly. Through their mastery of color, these artists redefined what it meant to create art, pushing beyond form and content to explore the depths of human emotion and the sublime potential of color. Automatism and the unconscious. Automatism, a key technique within abstract expressionism, is deeply rooted in the exploration of the unconscious mind. Influenced by the Surrealist movement, artists sought to bypass conscious control and tap directly into their subconscious thoughts, desires, and fears. By allowing the unconscious to guide their creative process, artists aim to capture raw, unfiltered emotion and instinctual expression, free from the constraints of reason and tradition. Automatism became a tool for creating art that was spontaneous, unpredictable, and often deeply personal, offering a direct channel into the artist's inner world. The principle of automatism originated with the Surrealists, who sought to access the unconscious as a means of liberation from societal norms and rational thought. They believed that the unconscious mind could offer a deeper, more authentic understanding of reality, and that tapping into it would allow for greater creative freedom. This idea resonated deeply with the abstract expressionists, many of whom were influenced by surrealist practices, but aimed to push further into abstraction. Artists like Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning embraced the notion of automatism, using it as a way to express emotional states and unconscious impulses that could not be articulated through traditional artistic methods. In action painting, Pollock's technique of drip painting exemplified the use of automatism. By allowing his brush or even his entire body to move freely over the canvas, Pollock created compositions that were spontaneous and driven by impulse rather than intention. The physical act of painting became a form of self-expression that bypassed cognitive control, channeling the unconscious directly onto the canvas. For Pollock, this method represented a way to break free from the constraints of the rational mind and connect with a deeper, more primal force. The resulting paintings, such as Number 5, 1948, are filled with frenetic energy, conveying a sense of emotional turbulence that transcends representation. Similarly, Willem de Kooning employed automatic techniques in his works, often allowing the brush to guide his hand as he painted abstracted figures and landscapes. His approach was less about creating a specific image and more about giving form to fleeting thoughts and emotions that emerged through the act of painting. In his series of woman paintings, the distortion and fragmentation of the female figure can be seen as a direct result of his subconscious mind pushing through the surface of the work. His gestural brushstrokes, made without a predetermined plan, conveyed the tension and complexity of human experience. Automatism, in its essence, is about surrendering control to the unconscious mind. Through this approach, abstract expressionist artists sought to create works that were not only visually striking, but also deeply expressive, reflecting the raw, emotional, and psychological states of the artist. It became a way to explore the hidden recesses of the mind, allowing for new forms of artistic expression that defied the limitations of conscious thought. By embracing automatism, these artists opened up new possibilities for the representation of human experience, creating art that spoke directly to the viewer's emotions and subconscious as well. The role of texture and materiality in composition. In abstract expressionism, texture and materiality became integral elements in the creation of meaning, enhancing the emotional and physical impact of the artwork. Unlike earlier movements, where the surface of the canvas was often kept smooth and controlled, abstract expressionists embraced texture as a means to convey the rawness of human emotion and experience. Artists sought to manipulate the surface of their canvases, making the material itself an essential part of the work. This approach highlighted the tactile nature of art, emphasizing the artist's physical interaction with the materials as a reflection of their inner world. The use of texture in abstract expressionism was often tied to the idea of spontaneity and the direct engagement of the artist with the medium. For example, Jackson Pollock's drip paintings, one of the most iconic techniques of the movement, are built up through layers of thick, viscous paint, often applied with energetic splashes or drips. These marks, left by Pollock's chaotic and spontaneous movements, give the paintings a rough, textured surface that invites viewers to engage with the work not just visually, but almost physically. The raised, uneven surfaces of his paintings are a testament to the artist's process and his intense interaction with the canvas. By leaving the traces of his brushstrokes, drips, and splatters visible, Pollock's works become more than just visual compositions. They are records of the artist's emotional and physical struggle. Similarly, Willem de Kooning's paintings often feature thick layers of paint applied with aggressive brushstrokes, palette knives, and even his hands. The resulting texture is dynamic and forceful, contributing to the sense of tension in his works. In his Woman series, for instance, the texture of the paint mirrors the distortion of the human form, heightening the emotional intensity of the figures. The thick, impasto applications of paint give the work a palpable physicality, allowing the viewer to sense the artist's hand in every stroke. This use of texture, combined with bold and fragmented shapes, transforms the surface of the painting into a space where emotional and psychological forces are visibly at play. The materiality of the paint itself also played a key role in abstract expressionism. The medium was no longer merely a tool for applying color, but became part of the composition. Artists like Clifford Still and Mark Rothko employed thick layers of paint, sometimes mixed with other materials such as sand, to create depth and texture. This not only added visual interest, but also gave the works a sense of weight and presence, inviting the viewer to experience the work as a physical object rather than just a flat representation. Texture and materiality in abstract expressionism served as vehicles for emotional expression and were crucial in breaking down the boundaries between artist, medium, and viewer. By emphasizing the physicality of the painting process, abstract expressionists transformed the act of creation into an immersive, multisensory experience. Through these textured surfaces and the use of varied materials, they sought to convey the complexities of human emotion and the immediacy of artistic expression. The result was a movement that valued the tangible presence of the artwork, offering viewers an intimate and visceral encounter with both the materials and the emotions embedded in the piece. Chapter 5: The Rise of Non-Representational Art. The rise of non-representational art marked a dramatic departure from centuries of artistic traditions rooted in the depiction of the physical world. While early art movements, from Renaissance to Impressionism, were focused on representing reality or capturing nature, the mid-20th century saw a fundamental shift. Non-representational art, also known as abstract or non-objective art, became a central feature of modern art, and abstract expressionism emerged as one of its most influential manifestations. In this context, artists began to experiment with form, color, and texture, moving away from any attempt to portray recognizable subjects or objects. One of the driving forces behind the rise of non-representational art was the desire to convey emotional and psychological depth without relying on the constraints of realism. Artists like Wassily Kandinsky, Kazimir Malevich, and Piet Mondrian had already begun exploring abstraction in the early 20th century, but it was abstract expressionism in the 1940s and 1950s that truly elevated the movement to the forefront of the art world. These artists sought to express universal human experiences and inner states, such as fear, joy, and anxiety, through non-representational means. Instead of relying on familiar images or symbols, they turned to the power of color, shape, and composition to communicate the intangible. The move towards abstraction was also influenced by broader cultural shifts, particularly the tumultuous events of the World War II era. In the aftermath of the war, traditional norms of representation seemed increasingly inadequate to address the complexities of modern life. Artists sought new ways to respond to the trauma, disillusionment, and uncertainty of the times. Non-representational art allowed for a more open-ended, subjective expression, where the meaning was not fixed, but rather left to the interpretation of the viewer. This departure from representation offered a sense of liberation, allowing artists to explore the full range of human experience in ways that were not bound by the literal or the observable. The rise of non-representational art also paralleled the increasing emphasis on individualism in both the art world and society at large. Abstract Expressionism, in particular, celebrated the unique vision and emotional authenticity of each artist. Through techniques such as action painting and color field painting, artists like Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Barnett Newman emphasized the artist's personal engagement with the medium and the importance of the painting process itself. The absence of recognizable forms in their work underscored the notion that art could transcend representation and become a purely emotional or spiritual experience. Ultimately, the rise of non-representational art represented a profound shift in how art was understood and experienced. It challenged the viewer to move beyond the familiar and engage with art on a deeper, more intuitive level. By rejecting traditional representation, artists were able to explore the full potential of abstraction, creating works that resonated with the emotional and psychological concerns of their time. Non-representational art would go on to influence countless artists and movements in the years that followed, leaving an indelible mark on the history of modern art. The rejection of figurative representation. The rejection of figurative representation was one of the most radical and defining features of abstract expressionism, marking a decisive break from centuries of Western art tradition. For centuries, art had been predominantly focused on the realistic depiction of the human form, landscapes, and recognizable objects. However, the abstract expressionists challenged this norm, seeking to move beyond the constraints of representation in favor of pure abstraction. This shift was motivated by a desire to express deeper emotional truths and psychological states that could not be captured by literal depictions of the external world. Instead of aiming to represent reality, abstract expressionists sought to create art that communicated directly with the viewer's emotions, bypassing the need for recognizable imagery. This rejection of figurative representation was influenced by several factors, including the philosophical and cultural changes of the early 20th century. The horrors of World War I, the subsequent disillusionment, and the rapid advancements in technology and science contributed to a sense of uncertainty and fragmentation in society. Traditional depictions of the human figure or the natural world no longer seemed adequate for conveying the complexities of modern life. Artists sought to break free from the expectations of realism and representation, instead focusing on the inner emotional experience. The idea was that abstraction, free from recognizable subjects, could evoke a more direct, primal response from the viewer, allowing for a deeper connection with the work. In addition to these cultural shifts, Abstract Expressionism was also deeply influenced by the growing interest in psychology and the unconscious mind. Artists such as Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Willem de Kooning were inspired by Freudian and Jungian concepts of the unconscious, seeking to express repressed emotions, desires, and psychological states through non-representational means. Pollock's drip paintings, for example, abandoned any trace of figuration in favor of spontaneous gestures and chaotic lines, reflecting the artist's unconscious impulses. The rejection of the figure allowed artists to focus purely on color, line, and texture as vehicles for emotional expression, giving them the freedom to explore the internal world rather than external appearances. The move away from figurative representation also opened the door to new artistic techniques and approaches. Artists used large-scale canvases, experimental brushstrokes, and even non-traditional materials to create works that were less about the subject and more about the process of creation itself. For instance, Pollock's physicality in his action painting technique was integral to the work, as the act of painting became as important as the final image. Similarly, Rothko's color field paintings, which featured large blocks of color without any recognizable form, invited viewers to engage with the emotional resonance of color itself, creating an almost meditative experience. Ultimately, the rejection of figurative representation in abstract expressionism was not a denial of the importance of the human experience, but rather an attempt to expand the possibilities of art. It was an effort to capture the emotions, thoughts, and states of mind that transcended visual representation, seeking to explore what lay beyond the visible world. Through abstraction, these artists offered new ways for both themselves and their audience to experience and interpret the complexities of modern existence. The influence of non-Western art traditions. The influence of non-Western art traditions played a significant role in shaping the evolution of abstract expressionism, offering artists new perspectives and forms of expression that transcended the limitations of Western artistic conventions. As the world became increasingly interconnected in the early to mid-20th century, Western artists began to look beyond their own cultural traditions for inspiration. This exploration of non-Western art, particularly from Africa, Asia, and indigenous cultures, provided abstract expressionists with fresh ideas, techniques, and approaches that helped redefine the boundaries of art. One of the most profound influences came from traditional African art, which was highly abstract and focused on symbolic representations rather than realistic depictions of the human figure. Many abstract expressionist artists were drawn to the powerful simplicity of African sculptures, masks, and textiles, which emphasized bold forms, rhythmic patterns, and spiritual meaning. The use of abstraction in African art, often linked to ritual and ceremony, suggested that art could be more than a mere representation of the visible world. It could be a means of conveying deeper truths, emotions, and experiences. Artists like Willem de Kooning and Jackson Pollock were particularly influenced by the dynamic energy and expressive forms found in African art, which encouraged them to move away from traditional figurative representation and explore more visceral, intuitive forms of abstraction. Similarly, Asian art traditions, including those from Japan and China, had a significant impact on abstract expressionism. The meditative, minimalistic qualities of traditional Japanese ink painting, with its emphasis on brushstroke and space, resonated deeply with artists like Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman. The Zen philosophy that underpinned much of Japanese art, which emphasizes simplicity, impermanence, and the concept of emptiness, aligned with the abstract expressionist interest in creating art that was more about process and emotion than representation. Rothko's use of large, uninterrupted color fields, for instance, can be seen as a reflection of this Eastern influence, inviting contemplation and introspection in a way similar to the meditative qualities of Zen art. In addition, the calligraphy and gestural brushstrokes of Chinese art, which emphasized fluidity and spontaneity, also informed the abstract expressionists' approach to painting. The idea of capturing the movement of the artist's hand and the energy of the moment became central to the practice of action painting, where the process of painting itself was an expression of the artist's emotional and physical engagement with the canvas. This emphasis on gesture and immediacy can be traced back to the influence of Chinese calligraphy, which prized the movement of the brush and the direct connection between the artist's mind and hand. The incorporation of non-Western influences into abstract expressionism was part of a broader cultural shift towards global awareness and the questioning of Western artistic dominance. By embracing elements of non-Western art, abstract expressionists were able to break free from the constraints of Western traditions, incorporating a richer, more diverse range of ideas and techniques into their work. This fusion of Eastern and African influences, along with other non-Western traditions, helped pave the way for a more universal, expressive form of abstraction that transcended cultural and geographic boundaries. Abstract Expressionism's global impact. Abstract Expressionism, as a groundbreaking art movement, had a profound and lasting impact on the global art scene, influencing not only artists in the United States, but also sparking a wide-reaching revolution in artistic practices across the world. Emerging in the 1940s and 1950s, abstract expressionism was initially seen as a distinctly American phenomenon, yet its influence quickly spread beyond the United States, reshaping the trajectory of modern art globally. By rejecting representational art and embracing abstraction, spontaneity, and emotion, the movement opened new possibilities for artistic expression that resonated across diverse cultures and art traditions. One of the most significant ways abstract expressionism impacted the global art community was by shifting the center of the art world from Europe to New York. In the post-World War II era, New York emerged as the new capital of the avant-garde, as artists from around the world flocked to the city to engage with the dynamic and experimental atmosphere of abstract expressionism. The movement's emphasis on individual expression and the breaking down of artistic boundaries encouraged a generation of artists in Europe and beyond to move away from traditional techniques and explore more experimental and abstract forms. In countries like France, Germany, and Italy, artists began to embrace non-representational techniques, integrating elements of abstract expressionism into their own work while still reflecting their local traditions and cultural contexts. In Europe, abstract expressionism found fertile ground in the aftermath of the Second World War, as artists sought new ways to grapple with the devastation and existential questions raised by the conflict. In France, artists like Jean-Paul Riopel and Hans Hartung incorporated elements of abstract expressionism's gestural painting style into their works, using dynamic brushstrokes and spontaneous mark-making to express the turmoil and emotional intensity of the post-war era. The influence of abstract expressionism was also evident in the work of the Italian artist Alberto Burri, who embraced unconventional materials and methods to create his textured, abstract pieces, challenging the limits of traditional painting. The movement also had a transformative effect on artists in Latin America, particularly in countries like Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil, where artists began to experiment with abstraction in their own ways. The Mexican muralist movement, which had been influential in the first half of the 20th century, saw an evolution towards more abstract approaches, influenced by the emotional and spontaneous qualities of abstract expressionism. In Brazil, the concrete art movement, which emphasized geometric abstraction, was informed by the idea that art could be a universal language of emotion and meaning, a concept championed by abstract expressionism. In Asia, the movement's emphasis on spontaneous gesture and emotion also found resonance, particularly in Japan. The Japanese Gutai group, formed in the 1950s, was directly influenced by abstract expressionism's focus on physicality and the direct engagement of the artist with the medium. Artists like Jiro Yoshihara and Shozo Shimamoto embraced the idea of action painting and the use of innovative materials to explore the boundaries of traditional painting, much like their American counterparts. Ultimately, Abstract Expressionism's global impact can be seen in the way it dismantled traditional ideas about art, paving the way for the development of various abstract movements worldwide. The movements focus on personal expression, experimentation, and emotional depth inspired generations of artists to explore new ways of working, fostering a truly international dialogue within the art world. Abstract Expressionism not only redefined what art could be, but also reinforced the idea that artistic innovation could transcend national borders, creating a universal language that spoke to the shared human experience. The role of the artist's emotion and intuition. In abstract expressionism, the role of the artist's emotion and intuition became central to the creative process, as the movement emphasized spontaneous expression and the direct translation of inner feelings onto the canvas. Unlike earlier art movements that focused on formal techniques and the representation of the external world, abstract expressionism sought to express the raw, unfiltered emotions of the artist. This emphasis on emotion and intuition was not just about creating aesthetically pleasing compositions, but about channeling the artist's subconscious mind and inner turmoil into their artwork. For many abstract expressionists, the act of painting became a deeply personal and almost therapeutic endeavor. The artists aimed to convey not just their thoughts, but their visceral experiences, making the work an extension of their emotional state. Jackson Pollock's iconic drip paintings are a prime example of this approach. Pollock often spoke of his need to let go of control during the creative process, allowing his emotions and physical movements to dictate the form and direction of his work. The large-scale canvases, filled with chaotic interwoven lines and splatters of paint, were a direct manifestation of Pollock's emotional intensity. His approach to painting was not about creating a recognizable image, but about expressing the internal forces and energy that surged through him. Through this process, Pollock's work became an exploration of his subconscious, a space where personal and collective emotions were free to emerge and take shape. Mark Rothko's work also highlights the importance of emotion in abstract expressionism, though in a different way. Rothko's color field paintings, characterized by large blocks of color, sought to evoke deep emotional responses from the viewer, with each painting serving as a window into the artist's inner world. Rothko often spoke about his desire to create art that was about human experience, its struggles, joys, and pain. The colors and their arrangement on the canvas were not arbitrary, but carefully chosen to elicit a specific emotional resonance. For Rothko, the emotional experience of the viewer was just as important as the artist's own emotional state during the creation of the work. His use of color and form was intuitive, designed to provoke reflection and a sense of transcendence. In addition to the conscious expression of emotion, intuition played a key role in the abstract expressionist process. Artists often let their instincts guide their work, trusting their inner sense of direction rather than adhering to a rigid plan or concept. This intuitive approach to painting gave rise to the gestural style that became synonymous with the movement, where the process of painting itself, marked by impulsive brushstrokes, splashes, and drips, was seen as a direct reflection of the artist's emotional and physical presence. The act of creating was, in many ways, a dialogue between the artist's inner self and the materials, allowing for the unfiltered release of emotion onto the canvas. Ultimately, the role of emotion and intuition in abstract expressionism was a response to the limitations of representational art, offering an alternative way to engage with both the world and the artist's inner experience. Through this emphasis on raw, emotional expression, abstract expressionists created works that were deeply personal and universally resonant, transcending mere visual representation to become a powerful exploration of human emotion and the creative process itself. Chapter 6: The New York School and its Impact. The New York School, a collective of influential artists, critics, and curators, played a pivotal role in the development and global spread of abstract expressionism. Centered in New York City during the 1940s and 1950s, this informal group of artists became the driving force behind the movement, establishing the city as the new capital of the art world, replacing Paris as the cultural epicenter. The New York School's impact was profound, not only in transforming the landscape of modern art, but also in reshaping how art was perceived, created, and understood in the broader context of post-war society. The movement was fueled by a sense of individualism, with each artist in the New York School pursuing their own unique style of abstract expression. Artists such as Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Mark Rothko, Barnett Newman, and Franz Kline were central figures in the group, and their works captured the essence of abstract expressionism: spontaneity, emotional intensity, and non-representational forms. Their collective effort to break free from the constraints of traditional representation gave birth to some of the most iconic and innovative works of the 20th century. The New York School also marked a shift in the way art was experienced and understood. It was no longer just about creating aesthetically pleasing images or representations of the world. It was about the artist's emotional and psychological engagement with the medium. The large-scale canvases, bold brushstrokes, and dynamic compositions were not simply decorative, but were deeply intertwined with the artist's personal expression and inner turmoil. The process of creation became just as important as the finished work, with many artists embracing the idea that the painting itself was a reflection of their emotional journey. Beyond the artists themselves, the New York School also had a significant influence on art institutions and the way art was curated and exhibited. Curators like Clement Greenberg and Harold Rosenberg were instrumental in promoting the movement and its artists, with Greenberg championing the formal qualities of abstract expressionism and Rosenberg focusing on the psychological and existential aspects. These critical figures helped elevate abstract expressionism to the forefront of the art world, turning New York into a hub for avant-garde innovation and setting the stage for the explosion of post-war American art. The New York School's impact extended far beyond the 1940s and 1950s. The movement's emphasis on individuality, innovation, and emotional depth influenced subsequent generations of artists around the world. Abstract expressionism opened the door to new artistic possibilities, inspiring the development of movements such as minimalism, pop art, and conceptual art. It also contributed to the internationalization of the art market as the influence of New York-based artists spread globally, cementing the city's place as the new center of contemporary art. Through its radical departure from tradition and its embrace of emotional expression, the New York School helped redefine the role of the artist and the purpose of art in the modern world. The formation of the New York School. The formation of the New York School in the 1940s marked a pivotal moment in the history of modern art, as it signaled the emergence of New York City as the new cultural and artistic center of the world. Following World War II, New York rapidly became the focal point for innovation and experimentation in the visual arts, displacing Paris, which had long held this status. This shift was a result of various social, cultural, and economic factors, including the migration of European artists fleeing the war, the rise of American patronage, and the city's unique blend of artistic freedom and intellectual energy. At the heart of this transformation was a group of young, avant-garde artists who would come to be known as the New York School. The New York School was not an organized group or formal collective, but a loose, dynamic network of artists, curators, critics, and galleries who shared common interests and ideals. Central to this group were figures like Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Mark Rothko, Barnett Newman, and Franz Kline, artists whose works would come to define abstract expressionism. The artists were united by a commitment to breaking away from traditional representational art, instead pursuing abstraction as a means of personal, emotional expression. They sought to transcend the constraints of figurative painting, creating works that prioritized raw emotion, spontaneity, and a sense of immediacy. The formation of the New York School was also facilitated by key institutions and individuals who helped nurture the movement. The Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, in particular, played a crucial role by providing a platform for new, innovative artists and supporting their efforts through exhibitions and acquisitions. Critic Clement Greenberg, an early champion of abstract expressionism, was instrumental in legitimizing the movement, emphasizing its formal qualities and the importance of the artist's individual vision. At the same time, Harold Rosenberg focused on the psychological and existential dimensions of the work, viewing the artist's act of creation as an expression of personal freedom and a confrontation with the self. The New York School's formation was also shaped by the city itself, which provided a fertile ground for artistic experimentation. New York's dynamic atmosphere, filled with cultural energy, intellectual exchange, and a rapidly evolving art market, allowed artists to push boundaries and take risks. The city's post-war energy reflected the spirit of innovation that defined abstract expressionism, making it an ideal place for the development of this radical new art form. Artists worked in close proximity to one another, sharing ideas and influencing each other's practices, while the city's galleries and museums attracted growing international attention. The formation of the New York School marked a watershed moment in the art world, not only elevating abstract expressionism as a dominant force, but also establishing New York as the global capital of contemporary art. Through their collective pursuit of new modes of expression, the artists of the New York School redefined the role of the artist and the purpose of art, setting the stage for decades of artistic innovation. The role of the Abstract Expressionist Artists Colony. The Abstract Expressionist Artists Colony played a crucial role in the development and dissemination of abstract expressionism, creating an environment where creativity flourished and where artists could share ideas, techniques, and inspirations. Located primarily in New York, these informal artists' communities allowed for a spirit of collaboration and experimentation, fostering the growth of a new, groundbreaking art movement. The sense of camaraderie within the colony was vital to the success of abstract expressionism, as it provided the necessary support system for artists who were pushing against the boundaries of traditional artistic practices. One of the most prominent artist colonies was located in the neighborhood of Greenwich Village and surrounding areas of Manhattan, where many abstract expressionists settled in the 1940s and 1950s. Here, artists like Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Franz Klein, and others would often interact socially and professionally, sharing ideas and engaging in intellectual and artistic discussions. These interactions were instrumental in forming the theoretical foundations of abstract expressionism, as artists would challenge each other's perspectives and encourage risk-taking in their work. The exchange of ideas and experiences became essential to the development of individual styles, while simultaneously reinforcing the collective nature of the movement. In addition to the urban network of artists, the role of the artists' colony was strengthened by various off-site locations where artists could retreat and work away from the distractions of the city. One notable example was the influence of the famous summer colony at the renowned Betty Parsons Gallery, where artists could focus on their work in a more secluded environment. This allowed for an escape from the pressures of the commercial art scene and gave artists the freedom to experiment with their craft. Moreover, the colony's sense of community was enhanced by social gatherings, events, and informal exhibitions that allowed the artists to showcase their work and receive feedback from their peers. These gatherings were often charged with intellectual and creative energy, providing a space where abstract expressionism could thrive and evolve. The colony also became a space for artists to engage with the political and cultural climate of the time. With the rise of the Cold War, the abstract expressionists were seen by many as a reflection of America's new artistic identity, and their work became associated with a sense of freedom and individual expression. The artists' collective presence in the city symbolized both a rejection of old artistic traditions and an embrace of the new, bold ideas that abstract expressionism represented. In sum, the abstract expressionist artists' colony was fundamental to the growth of the movement, offering both an intellectual and emotional support system that enabled artists to take risks and explore new artistic terrain. The colony became a place where creative energy flowed freely, inspiring a generation of artists to redefine the boundaries of art and to establish New York as the new center of the global art world. The relationships and collaborative spirit nurtured in these artists' colonies proved indispensable in the transformation of abstract expressionism from an emerging style into a dominant force in modern art. Critical reception and exhibitions. The critical reception of abstract expressionism was mixed in its early years, with some lauding the movement for its bold departure from tradition, while others criticized it as chaotic and incomprehensible. The movement's initial reception was heavily shaped by the intellectual and cultural atmosphere of the time. Abstract expressionism emerged in the late 1940s and 1950s, a period of intense global tension and post-war anxiety. This context influenced how critics and the public interpreted the movement's raw emotional power, its rejection of representation, and its focus on individual expression. For many, it was seen as a radical and revolutionary art form, while others viewed it as an overreaction to the horrors of war, arguing that it lacked the clarity and structure of previous artistic movements. Despite some early resistance, abstract expressionism soon gained widespread recognition, especially with the support of key art critics and curators. Clement Greenberg, one of the most influential critics of the time, became a vocal advocate for the movement, praising its formal qualities, such as its emphasis on flatness and color. Greenberg argued that abstract expressionism represented the highest achievement of modernist painting, as it stripped away all extraneous elements to focus on the pure visual language of art. His championing of artists like Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Barnett Newman helped solidify the movement's place in the art world, despite criticism from those who saw it as self-indulgent or overly abstract. Another important figure in the promotion of abstract expressionism was Harold Rosenberg, who focused on the philosophical and psychological aspects of the work. Rosenberg coined the term action painting to describe artists like Pollock, whose dynamic gestural brushstrokes conveyed the physical act of painting itself. His essays positioned abstract expressionism as a reflection of existentialism, where the artist's emotional engagement with the canvas was central to the creation of meaning. This intellectual backing helped elevate the movement to a position of importance in both the art world and wider cultural discussions. Exhibitions also played a crucial role in the rise of abstract expressionism. The Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, was instrumental in promoting the movement, hosting major exhibitions that showcased the work of abstract expressionist artists to a broader audience. Pollock's first solo show at MoMA in 1943, curated by the influential critic and museum curator Dorothy Miller, brought him widespread recognition. In the years that followed, MoMA and other galleries hosted groundbreaking exhibitions that solidified abstract expressionism as the dominant art movement in America. These exhibitions not only presented abstract expressionism to a public hungry for new art forms, but also allowed the movement to be positioned as a symbol of American innovation in the post-war world. In the years since its emergence, abstract expressionism has become one of the most revered and influential movements in the history of modern art. Its initial critical reception, though contentious, laid the groundwork for its eventual acceptance as a cornerstone of contemporary art. The support of critics, curators, and major exhibitions helped ensure that abstract expressionism would leave a lasting legacy, one that would shape the development of art for decades to come. The influence of New York on the art world. New York City's rise as the global center of the art world in the mid-20th century had a transformative impact on the trajectory of modern art, particularly through its embrace of abstract expressionism. The city's influence on the art world was not just a result of its vibrant art scene, but also its cultural, social, and intellectual energy, which provided fertile ground for the development of new artistic movements. During the 1940s and 1950s, New York became home to an array of avant-garde artists who sought to break free from the constraints of European tradition and explore new modes of expression. This shift was underscored by abstract expressionism, a movement that fundamentally altered the perception of art and the role of the artist. New York's status as a hub for abstract expressionism was shaped by its thriving artistic community, where artists, critics, and curators came together to exchange ideas and experiment with innovative techniques. The city's role as a melting pot of diverse ideas allowed artists to find a space where they could work outside the confines of academic traditions and explore the spontaneity, emotion, and individuality that defined the movement. The presence of key figures such as Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Mark Rothko, and Barnett Newman not only cemented the city's importance as the birthplace of abstract expressionism, but also attracted the attention of the global art world, which began to view New York as the epicenter of artistic innovation. In addition to its creative community, New York's institutions played a key role in shaping the movement's influence. The Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, in particular, was central to the promotion of abstract expressionism, hosting major exhibitions that introduced artists like Pollock and Rothko to international audiences. The museum's role in championing the movement helped solidify New York's position as the global leader in modern art, attracting collectors, critics, and art lovers from around the world. MoMA's influence also contributed to the rise of the American art market, with abstract expressionism becoming synonymous with American artistic prestige. New York's significance extended beyond its galleries and museums, however. The city's dynamic urban environment, its energy, and the aftermath of World War II contributed to a sense of artistic freedom and innovation. This was especially important for abstract expressionists who rejected European artistic traditions and sought to create work that was raw, immediate, and deeply personal. The act of painting became a physical, emotional release, with artists embracing New York's industrial landscape and cultural vibrancy as part of their creative process. Ultimately, New York's influence on the art world was profound, as it not only provided the birthplace for abstract expressionism, but also served as a catalyst for the broader transformation of the global art scene. The city became a symbol of modernity and creative independence, inspiring future generations of artists and establishing its place as the new capital of contemporary art. Through its contributions to the development of abstract expressionism and its support of avant-garde experimentation, New York reshaped the art world, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to shape artistic practice and theory today. Chapter 7: The Role of Criticism and Media. The rise of abstract expressionism was not only influenced by the work of its artists, but also by the critical reception and media coverage it received. Art criticism and the media played an instrumental role in shaping public perception of the movement, offering intellectual frameworks that helped the work resonate with wider audiences. While abstract expressionism's avant-garde nature and emotional intensity often provoked mixed responses, it was the support of key critics and the dissemination of their ideas through various media channels that helped elevate the movement to prominence. One of the most significant figures in the promotion of abstract expressionism was the critic Clement Greenberg, who became its primary champion. Greenberg's essays and reviews, particularly in the 1940s and 1950s, helped establish abstract expressionism as the pinnacle of modernist art. Greenberg praised the formal qualities of the movement, such as its emphasis on flatness, color, and the physical act of painting. He argued that abstract expressionism represented a break from traditional representational art and offered a more direct form of communication between the artist and the viewer. Greenberg's influence helped secure the movement's place in the mainstream art world, despite initial skepticism from certain quarters. Alongside Greenberg, critic Harold Rosenberg played a crucial role in articulating the philosophical and existential dimensions of abstract expressionism. Rosenberg's concept of action painting emphasized the importance of the artist's emotional and physical engagement with the canvas, framing the act of painting itself as a personal and transformative experience. He argued that the canvas became a battleground where the artist confronted their inner self, and this psychological element of the work gave abstract expressionism its depth and meaning. Rosenberg's perspective highlighted the intellectual complexity of the movement, attracting a more diverse and reflective audience. The media also contributed to the widespread recognition of abstract expressionism, with major newspapers and magazines covering the movement and its artists. Magazines like Life and Time provided platforms for discussing the work of artists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko, often showcasing their large-scale paintings and capturing their creative process. The media's portrayal of these artists as icons of American modernism helped elevate the movement beyond the confines of the art world, allowing it to resonate with the general public. While some press coverage was critical, especially in the early years, much of it contributed to the growing mythos surrounding abstract expressionism, framing the artists as bold and revolutionary figures. In addition to the critical discourse, the media's role in the visual representation of abstract expressionism had a profound impact on how the movement was perceived. The photographic documentation of artists like Pollock working in their studios or creating their dynamic, gestural paintings became iconic, symbolizing the freedom and spontaneity central to the movement. These images captured the intensity and energy of the artist's process, offering a glimpse into the physical and emotional act of creation. Ultimately, criticism and media coverage were essential in shaping abstract expressionism's legacy, helping to frame it as a groundbreaking and culturally significant movement. The dialogue between critics, artists, and the media not only elevated the movement's intellectual stature, but also ensured that it would be recognized as a defining force in the history of modern art. Through the support of critics and the widespread media attention it garnered, abstract expressionism became not just a style of painting, but a cultural phenomenon that resonated on multiple levels, from the personal to the political. The influence of critics like Clement Greenberg. Clement Greenberg was one of the most influential critics in shaping the reception of abstract expressionism, and his writings were instrumental in solidifying the movement's place in the history of modern art. Greenberg's critical approach was deeply tied to his understanding of formalism, the belief that the visual elements of a painting, such as color, form, and composition, were of paramount importance in understanding its value. For Greenberg, abstract expressionism represented the culmination of modernist trends, particularly the development of a painting style that was free from external references and focused entirely on the medium itself. Greenberg was particularly drawn to the work of Jackson Pollock, whom he championed as the quintessential abstract expressionist artist. Greenberg's support of Pollock and other leading figures in the movement helped elevate abstract expressionism to international recognition. He praised Pollock's unique approach to painting, specifically his use of drip techniques, as a breakthrough in the history of art. For Greenberg, the act of painting became a kind of performance, where the artist's gestures and movements were as important as the final composition. Pollock's emphasis on the physical act of creation, as seen in his energetic and spontaneous application of paint, was a prime example of the modernist ideal that Greenberg promoted. Art should engage with its medium and transcend representational content. Greenberg's writing, including his famous essay, Avant-Garde and Kitsch, positioned abstract expressionism as a radical departure from traditional representational art. He argued that art should be self-critical and self-referential, focusing on its inherent properties. Abstract expressionism, in his view, exemplified this idea, rejecting the illusion of depth and the mimetic representation of the visible world. Greenberg's formalist criticism underscored the importance of the two-dimensional surface of the canvas, encouraging an appreciation of how color, texture, and brushstroke could create meaning without the need for recognizable subjects. In addition to championing abstract expressionism, Greenberg's influence extended to the broader development of modernist art. His support for the movement helped secure its legitimacy within the institutional framework of the New York art world. Through his writings in journals such as Partisan Review and The Nation, and his close relationships with curators and museum directors, Greenberg ensured that abstract expressionism would be recognized as a key development in 20th century art. He played an essential role in promoting the idea that abstract expressionism was not just a fleeting trend, but a lasting achievement that represented the evolution of painting in a post-war world. Despite his unwavering support for abstract expressionism, Greenberg's critical influence was not without controversy. His formalist approach and emphasis on aesthetics over content led some critics to argue that he overlooked the social and political dimensions of the work. However, his advocacy for abstract expressionism undeniably helped to shape its trajectory, making him one of the most significant voices in the movement's critical reception. His impact on the art world remains profound, as his ideas contributed to the intellectual framework within which abstract expressionism was understood and appreciated in the years that followed. Abstract expressionism in the media and popular culture. Abstract expressionism's rise to prominence was not only fueled by the work of its artists and critics, but also by the media's growing interest in the movement and its impact on popular culture. The media played a significant role in framing abstract expressionism as a revolutionary movement, transforming it from an avant-garde artistic style into a broader cultural phenomenon. Through widespread media coverage in newspapers, magazines, and television, abstract expressionism became linked with American identity, artistic freedom, and modernity, attracting both praise and controversy. In the 1940s and 1950s, abstract expressionism began to gain visibility through major magazines such as Life and Time, which published articles about the movement and its leading figures. These publications presented abstract expressionism as an exciting new chapter in the history of art, capturing the public's imagination with images of artists like Jackson Pollock creating their bold and dynamic works. The media often depicted these artists as avant-garde heroes, positioned at the forefront of artistic and cultural change. The dramatic imagery of Pollock, for instance, draped in paint and working intensely on large canvases, reinforced the idea of the artist as a passionate, individualistic figure. This representation contributed to the public's fascination with abstract expressionism and helped elevate artists to celebrity status. Media coverage also played a key role in defining abstract expressionism in relation to broader cultural and political currents. In the post-war context, as the United States sought to assert its cultural dominance over the Soviet Union during the Cold War, abstract expressionism became a symbol of American freedom and creative expression. U.S. officials and institutions recognized the movement as a valuable tool in promoting American values abroad, with the U.S. Information Agency organizing exhibitions of abstract expressionism in Europe. The artists' rejection of European artistic traditions and their embrace of spontaneity and individuality were seen as aligning with democratic ideals, further bolstering the movement's international prestige. On the other hand, the media's portrayal of abstract expressionism was not universally positive. Some conservative critics, both in the media and in the general public, rejected the movement's seemingly chaotic and non-representational nature, viewing it as incomprehensible or even un-American. This backlash, however, served to amplify the movement's rebellious and avant-garde image, which, in turn, enhanced its appeal to young, progressive audiences eager for artistic innovation and social change. Beyond the art world, abstract expressionism also permeated popular culture, influencing a range of creative disciplines, including design, fashion, architecture, and music. The expressive brushwork and bold colors found in the paintings of artists like Mark Rothko and Willem de Kooning began to inform visual styles in advertising, fashion, and graphic design. The abstract aesthetic aligned with the modernist ideals of the mid-20th century and was incorporated into the broader cultural landscape, influencing everything from album covers to commercial art. Ultimately, abstract expressionism's relationship with the media and popular culture helped ensure its place in the cultural canon. Through media coverage, the movement transcended the realm of high art and became a symbol of American creativity and modernity. The movement's profound impact on both the art world and popular culture continues to resonate today, as its influence can be seen in contemporary visual art, design, and culture at large. The creation of an art market for abstract expressionism. The rise of abstract expressionism in the mid-20th century was not only a cultural and artistic revolution, but also the foundation of a new art market that would redefine the way contemporary art was bought, sold, and valued. As abstract expressionism gained prominence in New York, it quickly attracted the attention of collectors, dealers, and institutions who recognized the movement's potential both as a financial investment and as a symbol of American cultural supremacy. The creation of an art market for abstract expressionism was a multifaceted process that involved a combination of key players, shifts in art market dynamics, and the changing role of galleries and museums. One of the most important factors in the establishment of the abstract expressionism art market was the involvement of art dealers who saw the financial potential of the movement. Dealers like Peggy Guggenheim, who was one of the first to recognize Pollock's work, played a critical role in bringing abstract expressionist artists into the commercial spotlight. Guggenheim's gallery, Art of This Century, was not only a space for displaying avant-garde art, but also a launching pad for many of the movement's key figures, including Pollock, de Kooning, and Rothko. Guggenheim and other dealers began promoting abstract expressionism to wealthy collectors and institutions, helping to establish the artists' reputations and secure their place in the market. As the movement gained momentum, the role of galleries became increasingly significant. The New York gallery scene was transformed by the growing interest in abstract expressionism, with galleries like the Sidney Janis Gallery, the Betty Parsons Gallery, and the Leo Castelli Gallery emerging as key players in the promotion and sale of the work. These galleries not only presented the work of leading abstract expressionist artists, but also played an active role in shaping the market by cultivating relationships with collectors, curators, and critics. The marketing of abstract expressionism was heavily influenced by the efforts of these galleries, who worked tirelessly to position the artists as innovators and icons of modern art. The increasing commercial success of abstract expressionism was also tied to the growing role of museums and institutions. The Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, in New York, under the leadership of Alfred Barr, was instrumental in legitimizing abstract expressionism and helping to create a market for it. MoMA's exhibitions and acquisitions, coupled with its scholarly support for the movement, made abstract expressionism a central focus of the American art scene. Museums and private collectors began to compete for the acquisition of major works, driving up the value of abstract expressionist paintings. This new commercial interest led to a booming art market, with prices for works by artists like Pollock and Rothko rising rapidly, turning them into valuable assets for collectors and investors alike. However, the commercial success of abstract expressionism was not without controversy. The movement's embrace of non-representational and emotionally charged work was, for some, a symbol of artistic purity and creativity. Yet, for others, the increasing commercialization of the movement raised questions about the intersection of art and commerce. Critics and artists alike debated whether the rise of abstract expressionism in the art market compromised its artistic integrity. Despite this, the creation of an art market for abstract expressionism marked a new chapter in the history of art, with the movement's financial success helping to secure its place as a dominant force in the global art world. In the years following the rise of abstract expressionism, the art market would continue to evolve, with the movement's legacy serving as a foundation for subsequent generations of artists. The creation of an art market for abstract expressionism not only changed the way art was sold and collected, but also transformed the role of the artist, the dealer, and the collector in the broader cultural economy. Through its commercial success, abstract expressionism became a defining movement of the 20th century, securing its place in both the art world and the market. Chapter 8: Abstract Expressionism and Politics. Abstract Expressionism, while often seen as a purely artistic movement, was deeply intertwined with the political landscape of its time. Emerging in the aftermath of World War II, during the early years of the Cold War, the movement became enmeshed in the ideological struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. The tension between the democratic ideals of the West and the totalitarianism of the East profoundly shaped how abstract expressionism was perceived, promoted, and politicized both in the United States and abroad. Far from existing in a vacuum, abstract expressionism became a powerful symbol of American cultural dominance and political values, influencing how the movement was understood within global political contexts. In the United States, abstract expressionism was initially embraced by government officials and cultural institutions as an expression of freedom and democracy. During the Cold War, the U.S. sought to distinguish itself from the Soviet Union, and abstract expressionism was framed as a reflection of the individualism, creative freedom, and unrestrained expression that characterized American society. U.S. diplomats and cultural organizations recognized the power of art as a form of soft power in the ideological battle with the Soviet Union. Exhibitions of abstract expressionist works were organized as part of cultural diplomacy programs, with paintings by artists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko sent to Europe and beyond to project an image of American vitality and creative innovation. The abstract nature of the paintings, which rejected clear political or ideological messages, was seen as emblematic of freedom of thought and artistic expression. However, abstract expressionism's political association with the United States was not without controversy, particularly within the art world. Some critics, both at home and abroad, viewed the promotion of the movement as a calculated effort to use art for political purposes. In the Soviet Union and other communist countries, abstract expressionism was dismissed as formalism or bourgeois decadence, representing a kind of art that was disconnected from the social realities of the working class. Soviet leaders, in particular, promoted socialist realism as the legitimate form of art, one that was rooted in the service of the state and its ideals. This contrast between Western and Eastern artistic ideologies further heightened the political stakes of the abstract expressionism debate. Domestically, abstract expressionism's links to politics also sparked debates about the role of art in society. Some saw the movement's rejection of representational art and its embrace of emotional intensity as a sign of radical individualism and a break from traditional artistic norms. Others viewed it as an attempt to evade political engagement, with its non-representational approach being seen as detached from the pressing social issues of the time. Yet, for many artists within the movement, such as Pollock and de Kooning, the very act of creating abstract art in a time of political uncertainty and cultural turmoil was a form of resistance against the constraints imposed by both governmental institutions and traditional artistic expectations. Ultimately, Abstract Expressionism became a symbol of the complex relationship between art and politics during the Cold War. The movement's influence extended beyond the art world, reflecting broader political and ideological battles of the era. As both a tool of American diplomacy and a form of cultural resistance, Abstract Expressionism demonstrated the power of art to transcend national borders and engage with political narratives in profound ways. Art and the Cold War: the use of art for ideological purposes. During the Cold War, art became a significant battleground for ideological warfare between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both superpowers understood the power of art to shape perceptions, influence public opinion, and assert cultural dominance on the global stage. Abstract Expressionism, with its emphasis on individual expression, freedom, and innovation, was strategically embraced by the United States as a symbol of the democratic values it sought to project to the rest of the world. Conversely, the Soviet Union promoted socialist realism as the legitimate form of art, designed to reflect the ideals of socialism and the collective struggle of the proletariat. This ideological divide highlighted the growing importance of art as a tool for political propaganda during the Cold War. The United States, in particular, saw abstract expressionism as a weapon in the ideological battle against the Soviet Union, positioning it as a representation of American freedom and the unrestrained creativity that flourished in a democratic society. U.S. government agencies, such as the U.S. Information Agency, USIA, used abstract expressionism as part of their cultural diplomacy efforts to promote American values abroad. Art exhibitions featuring works by leading abstract expressionists like Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Willem de Kooning were sent to Europe, Asia, and Latin America as a part of the United States' strategy to contrast itself against the regimented, state-controlled art of the Soviet Union. The emotional intensity and non-representational nature of abstract expressionism were seen as symbols of individual liberty, a stark contrast to the rigid, politically sanctioned art of the Eastern Bloc. In Europe, abstract expressionism was met with mixed reactions. While some were captivated by its boldness and innovation, others viewed it as a manifestation of American imperialism. The movement's political significance was not lost on critics, who saw it as an extension of the U.S. government's global strategy. In countries like France and Italy, where socialist movements were strong, abstract expressionism was often viewed skeptically, as it appeared to align with the capitalist ideals of the West. Despite this, the movement gained substantial acclaim, and its influence spread, cementing its place in the international art world. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union promoted socialist realism as a counterpoint to abstract expressionism. Socialist realism was a style that depicted idealized, realistic portrayals of workers, peasants, and soldiers in heroic or optimistic settings, all designed to serve the goals of the state. Soviet authorities rejected abstract expressionism as a degenerate bourgeois art form, arguing that its non-figurative, abstract nature had no place in a socialist society. The Soviet Union's emphasis on art that promoted social and political ideals stood in direct contrast to the free-spirited, individualistic ethos of abstract expressionism. The Cold War art battle between abstract expressionism and socialist realism exemplifies how both superpowers understood the importance of culture in the shaping of public consciousness. Art was not just a reflection of personal or aesthetic values. It became a strategic tool for promoting ideological conformity and undermining the opposition. For the United States, abstract expressionism was not only an expression of artistic freedom, but also an embodiment of the American way of life. For the Soviet Union, socialist realism represented the triumph of collective unity over individual expression. In this way, art during the Cold War was as much about politics as it was about creativity, serving as a powerful medium for both cultural and ideological warfare. Abstract expressionism as a symbol of freedom. Abstract expressionism emerged as more than just an innovative artistic movement in the mid-20th century. It became a symbol of freedom, both in the United States and globally. Its emphasis on spontaneous, non-representational forms and individual expression resonated deeply with the ideals of personal liberty, democratic values, and creative autonomy. During the Cold War, when the world was divided between the ideological forces of the capitalist West and the communist East, abstract expressionism became a powerful visual representation of the freedom that defined American society. The movement's rebellious rejection of traditional artistic forms, along with its embrace of emotional intensity and individualism, aligned it with the broader cultural and political discourse of freedom. In the post-World War II context, as the United States sought to assert itself as a global leader and advocate for democratic values, abstract expressionism provided a means of contrasting itself with the Soviet Union. The non-figurative, often chaotic nature of abstract expressionist works suggested a break from rigid conventions and embrace of the free, unpredictable nature of creativity. Artists like Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and Mark Rothko embodied this freedom through their work, creating art that was not constrained by rules or established techniques. Pollock's drip paintings, for example, were a direct expression of personal freedom, as his physical movement and interaction with the canvas reflected an unfiltered release of emotion and energy. The United States government recognized the political potential of abstract expressionism during the Cold War and used it as a form of cultural diplomacy. U.S. diplomats and cultural organizations promoted the movement as a symbol of the American commitment to individual freedom, positioning abstract expressionism in direct opposition to the control and conformity that characterized the Soviet regime. Exhibitions of abstract expressionist works were organized and sent abroad, particularly to Europe, where they were presented as a testament to American cultural supremacy. The movement's rejection of figurative art, which was often seen as bound to tradition and politics, allowed it to be framed as an embodiment of the free spirit of the West. In this context, abstract expressionism became an art form that transcended aesthetic concerns and was imbued with political meaning. The spontaneity, emotional depth, and freedom of expression within the paintings mirrored the democratic ideals of choice, autonomy, and individuality. The very act of painting, free from the constraints of realism or representation, became a metaphor for the broader social and political freedoms that were central to the American identity. Thus, abstract expressionism not only reshaped the art world, but also became a powerful symbol of freedom, linking creative expression with the ideals of liberty, democracy, and personal autonomy during one of the most politically charged periods in history. The movement's connection to American identity. Abstract expressionism as an art movement became deeply intertwined with the development of American identity during the mid-20th century. Emerging in the post-World War II era, it reflected the cultural, social, and political shifts of the time and came to symbolize the United States' emerging position as a global superpower. As the Cold War tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union escalated, abstract expressionism was adopted as a key marker of American culture, representing the values of freedom, individuality, and innovation that were central to the American ethos. The movement's emphasis on personal expression and rejection of traditional artistic conventions mirrored the democratic ideals that defined American society. Abstract expressionist artists were seen as embodying the core tenets of American freedom: the ability to create art without constraint, to break free from the established rules of representation, and to convey raw, unmediated emotion. This connection between the movement and American identity was further cemented as the U.S. government, eager to promote its democratic values in the face of Soviet opposition, began to use abstract expressionism as a form of cultural diplomacy. Exhibitions of abstract expressionist works were organized around the world, particularly in Europe, where they were presented as a testament to the creativity and freedom that flourished in American society. Jackson Pollock, perhaps the most iconic of the abstract expressionists, became synonymous with the American avant-garde. His unique style, characterized by his drip technique, expressed the dynamic energy and boundless potential that seemed to embody the American spirit. Pollock's work, along with that of his contemporaries, such as Mark Rothko and Willem de Kooning, symbolized the nation's belief in the individual's ability to create and innovate outside of formalized constraints. In this way, abstract expressionism came to represent an artistic manifestation of the American dream, the idea that anyone, regardless of background, could achieve greatness through sheer effort and personal expression. However, the connection between abstract expressionism and American identity was not without controversy. Some critics viewed the movement as too inward-focused or disconnected from the social and political issues of the time, particularly during the Civil Rights Movement and other protests against American inequality. Yet, the broader cultural embrace of abstract expressionism as a symbol of American exceptionalism revealed the way art was instrumentalized to reflect the nation's values on the world stage. Ultimately, abstract expressionism became an integral part of the story of American identity, not just through its aesthetic contributions, but by acting as a mirror to the values that shaped the nation during a period of rapid change. The movement's revolutionary approach to art mirrored the American belief in the power of the individual and the pursuit of freedom, making it an essential part of America's cultural legacy. Chapter 9: Decline and Legacy of Abstract Expressionism. Abstract Expressionism dominated the art world in the 1940s and 1950s, but by the early 1960s, its influence began to wane. Several factors contributed to its decline, including changing cultural and political contexts, the emergence of new artistic movements, and shifting tastes within the art world. Despite its eventual decline, abstract expressionism left an indelible mark on the trajectory of modern art and influenced subsequent generations of artists, both in the United States and internationally. Its legacy continues to be felt today, as its emphasis on individual expression and the emotional power of abstraction remains central to many contemporary art practices. One of the key factors behind the decline of abstract expressionism was the rise of new artistic movements that offered fresh perspectives and approaches to art. By the 1960s, pop art, minimalism, and conceptual art began to gain prominence, challenging the dominance of abstract expressionism. These movements, in contrast to the gestural, emotionally charged works of the abstract expressionists, favored precision, irony, and intellectual engagement with popular culture and mass media. Pop artists like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein turned to mass-produced imagery, while minimalist artists such as Donald Judd and Frank Stella focused on clean lines and geometric forms. This shift in artistic sensibilities reflected broader societal changes, including the rise of consumer culture, the increasing importance of technology, and the cultural shifts of the postmodern era. Moreover, by the 1960s, abstract expressionism's association with the individualist ethos of the post-war period began to seem out of step with the rapidly changing political and social climate. The civil rights movement, the feminist movement, and the anti-Vietnam War protests ushered in a period of activism and collective social engagement, which found more resonance in the socially conscious art movements that followed. As the world became more politically polarized and socially active, abstract expressionism's focus on personal expression and the autonomous artist began to be seen as disconnected from the pressing issues of the time. However, despite the decline in its popularity, the legacy of abstract expressionism is undeniable. It was instrumental in establishing New York as the center of the contemporary art world, shifting the focus away from Europe and solidifying the city's role in the development of modern art. The movement's emphasis on abstraction and emotional expression also paved the way for later art movements, including color field painting, abstract minimalism, and the more experimental practices of contemporary artists. Moreover, The freedom and innovation associated with abstract expressionism have continued to influence artists working across a wide range of media, from painting to performance art and beyond. In retrospect, abstract expressionism's legacy can be seen not only in the formal innovations it brought to art, but also in the philosophical and cultural ideas it championed. The movement's focus on freedom of expression, the exploration of the subconscious, and the rejection of traditional artistic norms continues to resonate in contemporary art. Although the movement itself eventually declined, its impact on the art world is permanent, and its ideas about the role of the artist, the nature of creativity, and the power of abstraction remain integral to the ongoing evolution of modern and contemporary art. The rise of minimalism in pop art. In the 1960s, the dominance of abstract expressionism began to fade as new artistic movements emerged, most notably minimalism in pop art. These movements arose in response to the emotional intensity and gestural abstraction of abstract expressionism, offering fresh perspectives and reflecting the cultural, social, and political shifts of the time. Both minimalism and pop art challenged the ideals of individual expression and abstraction that defined abstract expressionism, and in doing so, they marked a significant shift in the direction of modern art. Minimalism, with its emphasis on simplicity, geometry, and industrial materials, stood in stark contrast to the emotional, spontaneous works of the abstract expressionists. Artists like Donald Judd, Dan Flavin, and Frank Stella rejected the subjective, highly personal expressions that characterized abstract expressionism. Instead, they focused on creating art that was impersonal, rational, and often made from everyday materials such as metal, plastic, and fluorescent lights. Minimalism's pared-down aesthetic and its emphasis on form over content reflected the era's growing interest in technology, industrialization, and the desire for precision. The movement's simplicity was a direct response to the chaotic, spontaneous nature of abstract expressionism, offering a more systematic and objective approach to art. Minimalist works often stripped away any overt emotional expression, inviting viewers to engage with the formal qualities of art, such as line, shape, and space, in a more intellectual manner. On the other hand, pop art emerged as a vibrant and playful counterpoint to the seriousness of abstract expressionism. Artists like Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, and Claes Oldenburg drew inspiration from mass culture, consumerism, and the imagery of advertising, popular media, and consumer products. Pop art's use of everyday objects, such as Campbell's soup cans and comic strips, challenged the notion of high art and its separation from popular culture. By incorporating mass-produced images and commercial techniques, pop art bridged the gap between art and consumer culture, reflecting the increasing commodification of culture in post-war America. Unlike the introspective, often obscure nature of abstract expressionism, pop art was bold, colorful, and accessible, reflecting the optimism and commercialism of the 1960s. The rise of minimalism in pop art signified a broader cultural shift away from the emotional intensity and subjective exploration of abstract expressionism toward a more externalized engagement with the world. These movements marked a departure from the values that defined abstract expressionism, embracing new approaches to representation, objectivity, and popular culture. While abstract expressionism's emphasis on individual emotion and freedom of expression remained influential, minimalism and pop art provided a more socially aware, accessible, and often ironic approach to art that resonated with the increasingly media-saturated and consumer-driven society of the 1960s. These movements not only reflected the changing cultural landscape, but also helped to shape the course of contemporary art for years to come. Abstract expressionism's influence on later movements. Although abstract expressionism's prominence began to wane in the 1960s, its influence on later art movements remains profound. The movement's emphasis on individual expression, emotional intensity, and the rejection of representational art helped to pave the way for numerous subsequent developments in the art world. Movements such as minimalism, color field painting, Neo-Expressionism, and Postmodernism all drew inspiration from abstract expressionism, whether through its formal innovations or its conceptual approach to the role of the artist. One of the most direct descendants of abstract expressionism was color field painting, which emerged in the 1950s and 1960s. Artists like Mark Rothko, Barnett Newman, and Clifford Still had already developed styles that emphasized large areas of color as a means of evoking emotional responses. Color field painters, such as Morris Louis and Kenneth Noland, further explored this use of color, creating expansive canvases that sought to engage the viewer in a meditative or spiritual experience. Though more restrained than the gestural action of abstract expressionism, color field painting retained the central idea of using abstraction to convey emotion, and its emphasis on pure color became a major influence on later movements. Minimalism, emerging in the 1960s, was in many ways a reaction against the emotional excesses of abstract expressionism. However, it was still influenced by the earlier movement's break from traditional forms of representation. Artists like Donald Judd and Frank Stella were concerned with the formal qualities of art, such as shape, line, and space, but they still retained abstract expressionism's desire to move beyond realism and explore the raw possibilities of abstraction. While minimalism sought to strip away subjective emotion, it inherited from abstract expressionism the belief in art as a direct expression of the artist's inner world, albeit in a more impersonal and intellectual manner. Another major influence of abstract expressionism was the rise of neo-expressionism in the late 1970s and 1980s. Neo-expressionist artists, including Julian Schnabel and Anselm Kiefer, returned to the emotional intensity and bold brushwork of abstract expressionism, but they incorporated figurative elements and social commentary into their works. This movement embraced the raw, visceral energy of abstract expressionism, fusing it with contemporary themes, such as the human condition, politics, and history. Finally, abstract expressionism's legacy can be seen in postmodern art, which frequently challenges established norms and embraces a diverse range of styles, techniques, and materials. The movement's rejection of traditional artistic boundaries paved the way for the pluralistic, eclectic nature of postmodernism, which often blends different genres, cultural references, and mediums in a way that recalls abstract expressionism's embrace of freedom and innovation. Ultimately, abstract expressionism's influence continues to resonate in contemporary art. Its ideas about artistic freedom, emotional expression, and the rejection of representational forms continuing to shape the work of today's artists. The continued relevance of abstract expressionism today. Despite being born in the mid-20th century, abstract expressionism remains highly relevant in the contemporary art world. Its influence can be seen across a wide range of artistic practices, from painting and sculpture to digital media and performance art. The movement's core principles, emphasis on personal expression, the liberation of form, and the exploration of raw emotion, continue to resonate with both artists and audiences today, demonstrating its lasting significance as a cornerstone of modern art. One of the key reasons abstract expressionism remains relevant is its commitment to individual freedom and emotional expression. In a world that is increasingly diverse, fragmented, and complex, the idea of art as a deeply personal and cathartic form of expression continues to hold great power. Artists today still find inspiration in the movement's rejection of representation and its focus on abstraction as a means to convey universal emotions and experiences. Abstract expressionism's focus on the process of creation, often characterized by spontaneity, intuition, and experimentation, resonates with contemporary artists who seek to break free from commercialized, formulaic art practices. Additionally, abstract expressionism's influence can be seen in the ways contemporary artists address social, political, and personal issues. While the abstract expressionists themselves were primarily focused on exploring the self, their works laid the foundation for art that reflects the inner emotional and psychological landscapes of the artist, often with a focus on identity, power, and personal struggle. Today's artists, particularly in the context of movements like postmodernism, continue to use abstraction and expression to examine the complexities of contemporary life. Artists like Mark Bradford, Julie Moretu, and Elizabeth Murray, for example, channel abstract expressionist techniques to convey complex narratives about race, gender, and global politics, reflecting how the movement's concerns with emotion and subjectivity are still vital in art. Furthermore, abstract expressionism's legacy lives on in the ways that art continues to be a site for experimentation. The techniques of gestural mark-making, the use of large-scale canvases, and the layering of textures are practices that still inform much of contemporary abstract painting. Artists working today often look back to Pollock's action painting or Rothko's color fields as a point of departure, while simultaneously pushing these ideas into new realms using digital tools, mixed media, and performance. The movement also maintains its relevance in art education, where it continues to serve as a fundamental reference point for discussing the evolution of modern art. Abstract expressionism's focus on process, emotion, and the rejection of traditional norms shape the trajectory of contemporary art and remains a key component in the study of artistic freedom and experimentation. Thus, abstract expressionism's power to speak to both the artist and the audience ensures its enduring presence in the landscape of contemporary art. Conclusion: the enduring impact on contemporary art. The legacy of abstract expressionism continues to shape the trajectory of contemporary art, ensuring its place as a foundational movement in the history of modern art. While the movement itself may have peaked in the mid-20th century, its influence remains deeply woven into the fabric of the art world today. The principles of emotional intensity, personal expression, and the liberation of form, which defined abstract expressionism, continue to resonate with contemporary artists who push boundaries, break conventions, and explore new means of communication through abstract techniques. One of the most enduring impacts of abstract expressionism is its emphasis on the artist's emotional and psychological engagement with their work. The movement's focus on the subconscious, intuition, and self-expression laid the groundwork for later art practices that prioritize the personal and subjective experience of the artist. This ethos of emotional freedom and exploration is seen in a variety of contemporary approaches, where artists challenge traditional norms and embrace authenticity and vulnerability in their creations. Furthermore, the movement's rejection of representation and narrative in favor of pure abstraction has led to a lasting appreciation for the expressive potential of abstract art, which continues to thrive in contemporary galleries and exhibitions around the world. Abstract expressionism also played a crucial role in establishing New York as the center of the global art world. The movement's rise coincided with the emergence of the United States as a dominant cultural force, particularly during the Cold War. Its global impact as a symbol of American freedom, individuality, and innovation created an art world that embraced bold, innovative practices. Today, the influence of abstract expressionism is still visible in New York and beyond, where contemporary artists continue to find inspiration in the exploration of color, texture, and the expressive use of space. Additionally, the movement's emphasis on process and the act of creation remains central to many contemporary art practices. The idea that art is not just the finished product, but also the result of an active, dynamic process is a principle that has permeated various disciplines, from performance art to installation art and beyond. The continuing interest in materials, techniques, and physical engagement with the artwork stems directly from abstract expressionism's commitment to spontaneity, gesture, and experimentation. In conclusion, abstract expressionism's enduring impact on contemporary art is undeniable. Its focus on personal freedom, emotional expression, and innovative techniques continues to inspire and challenge artists, ensuring that its revolutionary spirit endures in the creative practices of today's art world. The movement's legacy, while shaped by its mid-century context, remains a vital and transformative force in the ongoing evolution of modern and contemporary art. Chapter 10. Conclusion. Abstract Expressionism stands as one of the most influential movements in the history of modern art, shaping the landscape of 20th century artistic practice and continuing to reverberate throughout contemporary art today. Emerging in the wake of World War II, the movement encapsulated the shifting cultural, social, and political realities of the time, serving as a powerful response to the complexities and traumas of the modern world. Through its radical departure from traditional representation and its emphasis on personal expression, emotion, and abstraction, abstract expressionism redefined the role of the artist and the very nature of art itself. The movement's lasting impact can be seen not only in the formal innovations it introduced, such as the dramatic use of color, texture, and scale, but also in its philosophical and conceptual contributions to the art world. By focusing on the artist's inner emotional and psychological world, abstract expressionism emphasized the subjective experience and made the creative process itself an essential part of the artwork. This emphasis on individuality and freedom of expression paved the way for later movements and contemporary practices that continue to value the personal and emotional aspects of art. Moreover, abstract expressionism's challenge to representational art opened the door for more experimental forms of abstraction, inspiring movements like color field painting, minimalism, and neo-expressionism, each of which carried forward the idea that art could be a direct, unmediated expression of the artist's emotions and thoughts. Its influence extends beyond the visual arts as well, impacting literature, theater, music, and other creative fields that similarly sought to break free from traditional constraints. In today's art world, abstract expressionism's legacy endures through the continued exploration of abstraction and emotional expression in contemporary practices. Whether in large-scale paintings, multimedia installations, or performance art, artists continue to draw on the movement's core ideas, refining and reinterpreting them in the context of our own time. Furthermore, abstract expressionism's influence can be seen in the way that contemporary art challenges the boundaries between the personal and the political, the individual and the collective, highlighting art's power to address and reflect the complexities of the modern world. In conclusion, abstract expressionism's enduring relevance and impact demonstrate its transformative power within the history of art. From its revolutionary beginnings to its ongoing influence today, the movement continues to inspire artists and audiences alike, reminding us of art's capacity to engage with the deepest emotions and the most profound questions of human experience.